A Visit by Stecen Millhauser. Although I had not heard from my friend in 9 years, I wasn't surprised, not really, to receive a short letter from him dashed off in pencil, announcing that he had taken a wife, and summoning me to visit him in some remote upstate town I had never heard of. "Come see me on the 16th and 17th, was what he had actually written. "Be here for lunch." The offhand peremptory tone was Albert all over. He had scribbled a map with a little black circle marked Village and a little white square marked My House. A wavy line connected the two. Under the line were the words 3.5 miles more or less. Over the line were the words County Road 39. I knew those desolate little upstate villages consisting of one Baptist church, 3 bars, and a gas station with a single pump, and I imagined Albert living at an ironic distance with his books and his manias. What I couldn't imagine was his wife. Albert had never struck me as the marrying kind, though women had always liked him. I had plans for the weekend, but I canceled them and headed north. I still considered Albert my friend, in a way my best friend, even though I hadn't heard from him in 9 years. He had once been my best friend, and it was hard to think of him in any other way. Even in the flourishing time of our friendship, in the last 2 years of college and the year after, when we saw each other daily, he had been a difficult and exacting friend, scornful of convention, though quiet in his own habits, subject to sudden flare-ups and silences, earnest but with an edge of mockery, intolerant of mediocrity, and cursed with an unfailing scent for the faintly fraudulent in a gesture or a phrase or a face. He was handsome in a sharp-featured New England way. His family, as he put it, had lived in Connecticut since the fall of the Roman Empire. But despite the inviting smiles of girls in his classes, he confined himself to brisk affairs with leather-jacketed town girls with whom he had nothing in common. After graduating, we roomed together for a year in a little college town full of cafes and bookstores, sharing the rent and drifting from one part-time job to another, as I put off the inevitable suit-and-tie life that awaited me, while he mocked my conventional fear of becoming conventional, defended business as America's only source of originality, and read his Plato and his modern chess openings, and tootled his flute. One day he left, just like that, to start what he called a new life. In the next year I received postcards from small towns all over America, showing pictures of main streets and quaint village railroad stations. They bore messages such as, "Still looking," or, "Have you seen my razor? I think I left it on the bathtub." Then there was nothing for 6 months, and then a sudden postcard from Eugene, Oregon, on which he described in minute detail a small, unknown wooden object that he had found in the top drawer of the bureau in his rented bedroom, and then 9 years of silence. During that time I had settled into a job and almost married an old girlfriend. I had bought a house on a pleasant street lined with porches and maples, thought quite a bit about my old friend Albert, and wondered whether this was what I had looked forward to, this life I was now leading, in the old days, the days when I still looked forward to things. The town was even worse than I had imagined. Slowly I passed its crumbling brick paper mill with boarded-up windows, its rows of faded and flaking 2-family houses with sagging front porches where guys in black T-shirts sat drinking beer, its tattoo parlor and its sluggish stream. County Road 39 wound between fields of Queen Anne's lace and yellow ragweed, with now and then a melancholy house or a patch of sun-scorched corn. Once I passed a rotting barn with a caved-in roof. At 3.2 miles on the odometer, I came to a weathered house near the edge of the road. A bicycle lay in the high grass of the front yard, and an open garage was entirely filled with old furniture. Uncertainly, I turned onto the unpaved drive, parked with the motor running, and walked up to the front door. There was no bell. I knocked on the wooden screen door, which banged loudly against the frame, and a tall, barefoot, and very pale woman with sleepy eyes came to the door, wearing a long rumpled black skirt and a lumberjack shirt over a t-shirt. When I asked for Albert, she looked at me suspiciously, shook her head quickly twice, and slammed the inner door. As I walked back to the car, I saw her pale face looking out at me past a pushed-aside pink curtain. It occurred to me that perhaps Albert had married this woman and that she was insane. It further occurred to me, as I backed out of the drive, that I really ought to turn back now, right now, away from this misguided adventure in the wilderness. After all, I hadn't seen him for 9 long years. Things were bound to be different. At 4.1 miles on the odometer, I rounded a bend of rising road and saw a shadowy house set back in a cluster of dusty-looking trees. I turned into the unknown dirt drive, deep-rutted and sprouting weeds, and as I stepped on the brake with a sharp sense of desolation and betrayal, for here I was, in the God-forsaken middle of nauseating nowhere, prowling around like a fool and a criminal, the front door opened, and Albert came out, one hand in his pocket and one hand waving. He looked the same, nearly the same, though browner and leatherier than I remembered, as if he had lived all those years in the sun, his face a little longer and leaner, a handsome man in jeans and a dark shirt. "I wondered if you'd show up," he said when he reached the car, and suddenly seemed to study me. "You look just the way you ought to," he then said. I let the words settle in me. "It depends what I ought to look like," I answered, glancing at him sharply, but he only laughed. "Isn't this a great place?" he said, throwing out one arm as he began carrying my traveling bag toward the house. 10 acres, and they're practically giving it away. First day after I bought the place, I go walking around and bingo! What do you think I found? Grapes. Billions of grapes. An old fallen-down grape arbor, grapes growing all over the ground. Italy and New York. Wait till you see the pond." We stepped into the shade of the high trees, a little thicket of pines and maples that grew close to the house. Big bushes climbed halfway up the windows. It struck me that the house was well protected from view, a private place, a shadowy aisle in a sea of fields. "And yet," I said, looking around for his wife, "somehow I never thought of you as getting married, somehow." "Not back then," he said. "Watch that rail." We had climbed onto the steps of the long, deep-shaded front porch, and I had grasped a wobbly iron handrail that needed to be screwed into the wood. A coil of old garden hose hung over the porch rail. A few hornets buzzed about the ceiling light. On the porch stood a sunken chaise longue, an old 3-speed bicycle, a metal garbage can containing a rusty snow shovel, and a porch swing on which sat an empty flower pot. He opened the wooden screen door and with a little flourish urged me in. "Humble," he said, "but mine own." He looked at me with a kind of excitement, an excitement I couldn't entirely account for, but which reminded me of the old excitement, and I wondered, as I entered the house, whether that was what I had been looking for back then. The house was cool and almost dark, the dark of deep shade lightened by streaks of sun. Under the half-drawn window shades I saw bush branches growing against the glass. We had entered the living room, where I noticed a rocking chair that leaned too far back, and a couch with one pillow. Ancient wallpaper showed faded scenes of some kind, repeating themselves all over the room. Albert, who seemed more and more excited, led me up the creaking, worn-edged stairs to my room. A bed with a frilly pink spread, a lamp table on which lay a screwdriver with a transparent yellow handle, and quickly back down. "You must be starving," he said, with that odd quiver of excitement, as he led me through an open doorway into a dining room that was almost dark. At a big round table there were 3 place settings which glowed whitely in the gloom. One of the round-back chairs appeared to be occupied. Only as I drew closer through the afternoon darkness did I see that the occupant was a large frog, perhaps 2 feet high, which sat with its throat resting on the table edge. "My wife," Albert said, looking at me fiercely, as if he were about to spring at my face. I felt I was being tested in some fiendish way. "Pleased to meet you," I said harshly, and sat down across from her. The table lay between us like a lake. I had thought she might be something else, maybe a stuffed toy of some sort. But even in the dark daylight, I could see the large, moist eyes looking here and there. I could see her rapid breathing and smell her marshy odor. I thought Albert must be making fun of me in some fashion, trying to trick me into exposing what he took to be my hideous bourgeois soul. But whatever his game, I wasn't going to give myself away. "Help yourself," Albert said, pushing toward me a breadboard with a round loaf and a hunk of cheese on it. A big bladed knife lay on the table, and I began cutting the bread. "And if you'd cut just a little piece of cheese for Alice." I immediately cut a little piece of cheese for Alice. Albert disappeared into the kitchen, and in the room's dusk I stared across the round table at Alice before looking away uncomfortably. Albert returned with a wax carton of orange juice and a small brown bottle of beer, both of which he set before me. "The choice," he said with a little bow, "is yours entirely." He picked up the piece of cheese I had cut for Alice, placed it on her plate, and broke it into smaller pieces. Alice looked at him. It seemed to me that she looked at him with those moist and heavy-lidded eyes, and flicked up her cheese. Then she placed her throat on the table edge and sat very still. Albert sat down and cut himself a piece of bread. "After lunch I want to show you the place, take you down to the pond and so on." He looked at me, tilting his head in a way I suddenly remembered. "And you? It's been a while." "Oh, still a roving bachelor," I said, and immediately disliked my fatuous tone. I had a sudden urge to talk seriously to Albert, as we'd done in the old days, watching the night turn slowly gray through our tall, arched windows. But I felt constrained. It had been too long a time, and though he had summoned me after all these years, though he had shown me his wife, it was all askew somehow, as if he hadn't shown me anything, as if he'd kept himself hidden away. And I remembered that even then, in the time of our friendship, he had seemed intimate and secretive at the same time, as if even his revelations were forms of concealment. "Not that I have any fixed plan," I continued. "I see women, but they're not the right one. You know, I was always sure I'd be the one to get married, not you. It wasn't something I planned, but when the moment comes, you'll know." He looked at Alice with tenderness, and suddenly leaned over and touched the side of her head lightly with his fingertips. "How did you—" I began, and stopped. I felt like bursting into screams of wild laughter, or of outrage, pure outrage, but I held myself down. I pretended everything was fine. "I mean, how did you meet? You two, if I may ask." So formal, "if you may ask." "Down by the pond, if I may answer. I saw her in the reeds one day. I'd never seen her before, but she was always there after that. I'll show you the exact place after lunch." His little mocking rebuke irritated me, and I recalled how he had always irritated me and made me retreat more deeply into myself because of some little reproach, some little ironic look. And it seemed strange to me that someone who irritated me and made me retreat into myself was also someone who released me into a freer version of myself, a version superior to the constricted one that had always felt like my own hand on my throat. But who was Albert, after all, that he should have the power to release me or constrict me? This man I no longer knew, with his run-down house and his ludicrous frog wife. Then I ate for a while in sullen silence, looking only at my food, and when I glanced up, I saw him looking at me kindly, almost affectionately. "It's all right," he said quietly, as if he understood, as if he knew how difficult it was for me, this journey, this wife, this life. And I was grateful, as I had always been, for we had been close, he and I, back then. After lunch, he insisted on showing me his land, his domain, as he called it. I had hoped that Alice might stay behind, so that I could speak with him alone, but it was clear that he wanted her to come with us. So, as we made our way out the back door and into his domain, she followed along, taking hops about 2 strides in length, always a little behind us or a little before. At the back of the house, a patch of overgrown lawn led to a vegetable garden on both sides of a grassy path. There were vines of green peas and string beans climbing tall sticks, clusters of green peppers, rows of carrots and radishes identified by seed packets on short sticks, fat heads of lettuce and flashes of yellow squash, a rich and well-tended oasis, as if the living center of the house were here, on the outside, hidden in back. At the end of the garden grew a scattering of fruit trees, pear and cherry and plum. An old wire fence with a broken wooden gate separated the garden from the land beyond. We walked along a vague footpath through fields of high grass, passed into thickets of oak and maple, crossed a stream. Alice kept up the pace. Alice in sunlight, Alice in the open air, no longer seemed a grotesque pet, a monstrous mistake of nature, a nightmare frog and freakish wife, but rather a companion of sorts, staying alongside us, resting when we rested, Albert's pal. And yet it was more than that, for when she emerged from high grass or tree shade into full sunlight, I saw or sensed for a moment, with a kind of inner start, Alice as she was, Alice in the sheer brightness and fullness of her being, as if the dark malachite sheen of her skin, the pale shimmer of her throat, the moist warmth of her eyes were as natural and mysterious as the flight of a bird. Then I would tumble back into myself and realize that I was walking with my old friend beside a monstrous lumbering frog who had somehow become his wife, and a howl of inward laughter and rage would erupt in me, calmed almost at once by the rolling meadows, the shady thickets, the black crow rising from a tree with slowly lifted and lowered wings, rising higher and higher into the pale blue sky, touched here and there with delicate fern-like clouds. The pond appeared suddenly on the far side of a low rise. Reeds and cattails grew in thick clusters at the marshy edge. We sat down on flat-topped boulders and looked out at the green-brown water where a few brown ducks floated, out past fields to a line of low hills. There was a desolate beauty about the place, as if we had come to the edge of the world. It was over there I first saw her, Albert said, pointing to a cluster of reeds. Alice sat off to one side, low to the ground, in a clump of grass at the water's edge. She was still as a rock, except for her sides moving in and out as she breathed. I imagined her growing in the depths of the pond, under a mantle of lily pads and mottled scum, down below the rays of green sunlight, far down at the silent bottom of the world. Albert leaned back on both elbows, a pose I remembered well, and stared out at the water. For a long while we sat in a silence that struck me as uncomfortable, though he himself seemed at ease. It wasn't so much that I felt awkward in Alice's presence as that I didn't know what I had come all this way to say. Did I really want to speak at all? Then Albert said, "Tell me about your life." And I was grateful to him, for that was exactly what I wanted to talk about, my life. I told him about my almost marriage, my friendships that lacked excitement, my girlfriends who lacked one thing or another, my good job that somehow wasn't exactly what I had been looking for back then, my feeling that things were all right, but not as all right as they might be, that I was not unhappy, but not really happy either, but caught in some intermediate place, looking both ways. And as I spoke, it seemed to me that I was looking in one direction toward a happiness that was growing vaguer, and in the other direction toward an unhappiness that was emerging more clearly, without yet revealing itself completely. "It's hard," Albert then said, in the tone of someone who knew what I was talking about. and though I was soothed by his words, which were spoken gently, I was disappointed that he didn't say more, that he didn't show himself to me. And I said, "Why did you write to me after all this time?" Which was only another way of saying, "Why didn't you write to me in all this time?" "I waited," he said, "until I had something to show you." That was what he said, something to show me. And it seemed to me then that if all he had to show me after 9 years was his run-down house and his marshy frog wife, then I wasn't so badly off, in my own way. Not really. After that, we continued walking about his domain, with Alice always at our side. He showed me things, and I looked. He showed me the old grape arbor that he had put back up. Unripe green grapes, hard as nuts, hung in bunches from the decaying slats. "Try one," he said, but it was bitter as a tiny lemon. He laughed at my grimace. "We like 'em this way," he said, plucking a few into his palm, then tossing them into his mouth. He pulled off another handful and held them down to Alice, who devoured them swiftly. Flick, flick, flick. He showed me a woodpecker's nest and a slope of wild tiger lilies, and an old tool shed containing a rusty hoe and a rusty rake. Suddenly, from a nearby field, a big bird rose up with a loud beating of wings. "Did you see that?" cried Albert, seizing my arm. "A pheasant, protecting her young, over there." In the high grass, 6 fuzzy little duck-like creatures walked in a line, their heads barely visible. At dinner, Alice sat in her chair with her throat resting on the edge of the table, while Albert walked briskly in and out of the kitchen. I was pleased to see a fat bottle of red wine, which he poured into 2 juice glasses. The glasses had pictures of Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore on them. "Guy gave them to me at a gas station," Albert said. He frowned suddenly, pressed his fingertips against his forehead, looked up with a radiant smile. "I've got it. The more it snows, tiddly-pom, the more it goes, tiddly-pom." He poured a little wine into a cereal bowl and placed it near Alice. Dinner was a heated-up supermarket chicken, fresh squash from his garden, and big bowls of garden salad. Albert was in high spirits, humming snatches of songs, lighting a stub of candle in a green wine bottle, filling our wine glasses and Alice's bowl again and again, urging me to drink up, crunching lustily into his salad. The cheap wine burned my tongue, but I kept drinking, taken by Albert's festive spirit, eager to carry myself into his mood. Even Alice kept finishing the wine he put in her cereal bowl. The candle flame seemed to grow brighter in the darkening air of the room. Through bush branches in the window I saw streaks of sunset. A line of wax ran down the bottle and stopped. Albert brought in his breadboard, more salad, another loaf of bread. And as the meal continued, I had the sense that Alice, sitting there with her throat resting on the table edge, flicking up her wine, was looking at Albert with those large eyes of hers, moist and dark in the flamelight. She was looking at him and trying to attract his attention. Albert was leaning back in his chair, laughing, throwing his arm about as he talked, but it seemed to me that he was darting glances back at her. Yes, they were exchanging looks, there at the darkening dinner table, looks that struck me as amorous. And as I drank, I was filled with a warm, expansive feeling, which took in the room, the meal, the Winnie the Pooh glasses, the large, moist eyes, the reflection of the candle flame in the black window, the glances of Albert and his wife. For after all, she was the one he had chosen, up here in the wilderness, and who was I to say what was right in such matters? Albert leaped up and returned with a bowl of pears and cherries from his fruit trees, and filled my glass again. I was settling back with my warm, expansive feeling, looking forward to the night of talk stretching lazily before me, when Albert announced that it was getting late. He and Alice would be retiring. I had the run of the house. Just be sure to blow out the candle. Nighty-night. Through the roar of wine, I was aware of my plunging disappointment. He pulled back her chair and she hopped to the floor. Together they left the dining room and disappeared into the dark living room, where he turned on a lamp so dim that it was like lighting a candle. I heard him creaking up the stairs and thought I heard a dull thumping sound as I imagined Alice lumbering her way up beside him. I sat listening to the thumps and creaks of the upper hall, a sudden sharp rush of water in the bathroom sink, a squeak. What was that squeak? A door shutting. In the abrupt silence, which seemed to spread outward from the table in widening ripples, I felt abandoned, there with the wine and the candle and the glimmering dishes. Yet I saw that it was bound to be this way, and no other way, for I had watched their amorous looks. It was only to be expected. And hadn't he, back then, been in the habit of unexpected departures? Then I began to wonder whether they had ever taken place, those talks stretching into the gray light of dawn, or whether I had only desired them. Then I imagined Alice hopping onto the white sheets. And I tried to imagine frog love, its possible pleasures, its oozy raptures. But I turned my mind violently away, for in the imagining I felt something petty and cruel, something in the nature of a violation. I drank down the last of the wine and blew out the candle. From the dark room where I sat, I could see a ghostly corner of refrigerator in the kitchen, and a dim-lit reddish couch arm in the living room like a moonlit dead flower. A car passed on the road. Then I became aware of the crickets, whole fields and meadows of them, the great hum that I had always heard rising from backyards and vacant lots in childhood summers, the long sound of summer's end. And yet it was only the middle of summer, was it not? Just last week I had spent a day at the beach. So for a long time I sat at the dark table in the middle of a decaying house, listening to the sound of summer's end. Then I picked up my empty glass, silently saluted Albert and his wife, and went up to bed. But I could not sleep. Maybe it was the wine, or the mashed mattress, or the early hour, but I lay there twisting in my sheets, and as I turned restlessly, the day's adventures darkened in my mind, and I saw only a crazed friend, a ruined house, an ugly and monstrous frog. And I saw myself, weak and absurd, wrenching my mind into grotesque shapes of sympathy and understanding. At some point I began to slide in and out of dreams, or perhaps it was a single long dream broken by many half-wakings. I was walking down a long hall with a forbidden door at the end. With a sense of mournful excitement, I opened the door and saw Albert standing with his arms crossed, looking at me sternly. He began to shout at me, his face became very red, and bending over, he bit me on the hand. Tears ran down my face. Behind him, someone rose from a chair and came toward us. "Here," said the newcomer, who was somehow Albert, "use this." He held up a handkerchief draped over his fist, and when I pulled off the handkerchief, a big frog rose angrily into the air with wild flappings of its wings. I woke tense and exhausted in a sun-streaked room. Through a dusty window I saw tree branches with big three-lobed leaves, and between the leaves pieces of blue sky. It was nearly 9. I had 3 separate headaches, one behind my left eye, one in my right temple, and one at the back of my head. I washed and dressed quickly and made my way down the darkening stairs through a dusk that deepened as I drew toward the bottom. On the faded wallpaper, I could make out 2 scenes repeating themselves into the distance. A faded boy in blue lying against a faded yellow haystack with a horn at his side, and a girl in white drawing water from a faded well. The living room was empty. The whole house appeared to be deserted. On the round table in the twilight of the dining room, the dishes still sat from dinner. All I wanted was a cup of coffee before leaving. In the slightly less gloomy kitchen, I found an old jar of instant coffee and a chipped blue teapot decorated with a little decal picturing an orange brontosaurus. I heard sharp sounds, and through the leaves and branches in the kitchen window, I saw Albert with his back to me, digging in the garden. Outside the house, it was a bright, sunny day. Beside him, on the dirt, sat Alice. I brought my cup of harsh-tasting stale coffee into the dining room and drank it at the table while I listened to the sounds of Albert's shovel striking the soil. It was peaceful in the darkish room at the round brown table. A thin slant of sun glittered in the open kitchen. The sun slant mingled with the whistle of a bird, leaves in the window, the brown dusk, the sound of the shovel striking loam, turning it over. It occurred to me that I could simply pack my things now and glide away without the awkwardness of a leave-taking. I finished the dismal coffee and carried the cup into the kitchen, where the inner back door stood slightly open. There I paused, holding the empty cup in my hand. Obeying a sudden impulse, I opened the door a little more and slipped between it and the wooden screen door. Through the buckled screen, I could see Albert some 10 feet away. His sleeves were rolled up, and his foot was pressing down on the blade of the shovel. He was digging up grassy dirt at the edge of the garden, turning it over, breaking up the soil, tossing away clumps of grass roots. Nearby sat Alice, watching him. From time to time, as he moved along the edge of the garden, he would look over at her. Their looks seemed to catch for a moment before he returned to his garden. Standing in the warm shade of the half-open door, looking through the rippling screen at the garden quivering with sunlight, I sensed a mysterious rhythm trembling between Albert and his wife, a kind of lightness or buoyancy, a quivering sunlit harmony. It was as if both of them had shed their skins and were mingling in air, or dissolving into light. And as I felt that airy mingling, that tender dissolution, as I sensed that hidden harmony, clear as the ringing of a distant bell, it came over me that what I lacked in my life was exactly that harmony. It was as if I were composed of some hard substance that could never dissolve in anything, whereas Albert had discovered the secret of air. But my throat was beginning to hurt, the bright light burned my eyes, and setting down my cup on the counter, which sounded like the blow of a hammer, I pushed open the door and went out. Albert turned around in the sun. "Sleep well?" he said, running the back of his hand slowly across his dripping forehead. "Well enough. But you know, I've got to be getting back. A million things to do. You know how it is." "Sure," Albert said. He rested both hands on the top of the long shovel handle and placed his chin on his hands. "I know how it is." His tone struck me as brilliantly poised between understanding and mockery. He brought my bag down from my room and loaded it in the car. Alice had hopped through the dining room and living room and had come to rest in the deep shade of the front porch. It struck me that she kept carefully out of sight of the road. Albert bent over the driver's window and crossed his arms on the door. "If you're ever up this way," he said. But who would ever be up that way? "Drop in." "I'll do that," I said. Albert stood up and stretched out an elbow, rubbed his shoulder. "Take care," he said, and gave a little wave and stepped away. As I backed up the dirt driveway and began edging onto County Road 39, I had the sense that the house was withdrawing into its trees and shadows, fading into its island of shade. Albert had already vanished. From the road I could see only a stand of high trees clustered about a dark house. A few moments later, at the bend of the road, I glanced back again. I must have waited a second too long, because the road was already dipping, the house had sunk out of sight, and in the bright sunshine I saw only a scattering of roadside trees, a cloudless sky, fields of Queen Anne's lace stretching away.
Baster. The recipe came in the mail. Mix semen of 3 men. Stir vigorously. Fill turkey baster. Recline. Insert nozzle. Squeeze. Ingredients: 1 pinch Stu Wadsworth, 1 pinch Jim Friesen, 1 pinch Wally Mars. There was no return address, but Thomasina knew who had sent it. Diane, her best friend and recently fertility specialist. Ever since Thomasina's latest catastrophic breakup, Diane had been promoting what they referred to as Plan B. Plan A they'd been working on for some time. It involved love and a wedding. They'd been working on Plan A for a good 8 years. But in the final analysis, and this was Diane's whole point, Plan A had proved much too idealistic. So now they were giving Plan B a look. Plan B was more devious and inspired. Less romantic, more solitary, sadder, but braver too. It stipulated borrowing a man with decent teeth, body, and brains, free of the major diseases, who was willing to heat himself up with private fantasies. They didn't have to include Thomasina, in order to bring off the tiny sputter that was indispensable to the grand achievement of having a baby. Like twin Schwarzkopfs, the two friends noted how the field of battle had changed of late, the reduction in their artillery. They'd both just turned 40. The increasing guerrilla tactics of the enemy. Men didn't even come out into the open anymore. And the complete dissolution of the code of honor. The last man who'd got Thomasina pregnant, not the boutique investment banker, the one before him, the Alexander Technique instructor, hadn't even gone through the motions of proposing marriage. His idea of honor had been to split the cost of the abortion. There was no sense denying it. The finest soldiers had quit the field, joining the peace of marriage. What was left was a ragtag gang of adulterers and losers, hit-and-run types, village burners. Thomasina had to give up the idea of meeting someone she could spend her life with. Instead, she had to give birth to someone who would spend life with her. But it wasn't until she received the recipe that Thomasina realized she was desperate enough to go ahead. She knew it before she'd even stopped laughing. She knew it when she found herself thinking, Stu Wadsworth I could maybe see. But Wally Mars... Thomasina, I repeat, like a ticking clock, was 40. She had pretty much everything she wanted in life. She had a great job as an assistant producer of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. She had a terrific adult-sized apartment on Hudson Street. She had good looks, mostly intact. Her breasts weren't untouched by time, but they were holding their own. And she had new teeth. She had a set of gleaming new bonded teeth. They'd whistled at first before she got used to them, but now they were fine. She had biceps. She had an IRA kicked up to $175,000, but she didn't have a baby. Not having a husband she could take. Not having a husband was, in some respects, preferable, but she wanted a baby. After 35, the magazine said, a woman begins to have trouble conceiving. Thomasina couldn't believe it. Just when she got her head on straight, her body started falling apart. Nature didn't give a damn about her maturity level. Nature wanted her to marry her college boyfriend. In fact, from a purely reproductive standpoint, nature would have preferred that she marry her high school boyfriend. While Thomasina had been going on about her life, she hadn't noticed it. The eggs, pitching themselves into oblivion month by month. She saw it all now. While she canvassed for Ryperg in college, her uterine walls had been thinning. While she got her journalism degree, her ovaries had cut estrogen production. And while she slept with as many men as she wanted, her fallopian tubes had begun to narrow, to clog, during her 20s. That extended period of American childhood, the time when, educated and employed, she could finally have some fun. Thomasina once had 5 orgasms with a cab driver named Ignacio Varanis while parked on Gansevoort Street. He had a bent, European-style penis and smelled like flan. Thomasina was 25 at the time. She wouldn't do it again, but she was glad she'd done it then, so as not to have regrets. But in eliminating some regrets, you create others. She'd only been in her 20s. She'd been playing around was all. But the 20s become the 30s, and a few failed relationships put you at 35, when one day you pick up Mirabella and read, after 35, a woman's fertility begins to decrease. With each year, the proportion of miscarriages and birth defects rises. It had risen for 5 years now. Thomasina was 40 years, 1 month, and 14 days old. And panicked. And sometimes not panicked. Sometimes perfectly calm and accepting about the whole thing. She thought about them, the little children she never had. They were lined at the windows of a ghostly school bus, faces pressed against the glass, huge-eyed, moist-lashed. They looked out, calling, "We understand. It wasn't the right time. We understand. We do." The bus shuddered away, and she saw the driver. He raised one bony hand to the gear shift, turning to Thomasina as his face split open in a smile. The magazine also said that miscarriages happened all the time, without a woman's even noticing. Tiny blastulas scraped against the womb's walls and, finding no purchase, hurtled downward through the plumbing, human and otherwise. Maybe they stayed alive in the toilet bowl for a few seconds, like goldfish, she didn't know. But with 3 abortions, 1 official miscarriage, and who knows how many unofficial ones, Thomasina's school bus was full. When she awoke at night, she saw it slowly pulling away from the curb, and she heard the noise of the children packed in their seats, that cry of children indistinguishable between laughter and scream. Everyone knows that men objectify women, but none of our sizing up of breasts and legs can compare with the cold-blooded calculation of a woman in the market for semen. Thomasina was a little taken aback by it herself, and yet she couldn't help it. Once she made her decision, she began to see men as walking spermatozoa. At parties over glasses of Barolo, soon to be giving it up, she drank like a fish. Thomasina examined the specimens who came out of the kitchens, or loitered in the hallways, or held forth from the armchairs, and sometimes, her eyes misting, she felt that she could discern the quality of each man's genetic material. Some semen auras glowed with charity. Others were torn with enticing holes of savagery, still others flickered and dimmed with substandard voltage. Thomasina could ascertain health by a guy's smell or complexion. Once, to amuse Diane, she'd ordered every male party guest to stick out his tongue. The men had obliged, asking no questions. Men always oblige. Men like being objectified. They thought that their tongues were being inspected for nimbleness toward the prospect of oral abilities. "Open up and say ah," Thomasina kept commanding all night long, and the tongues unfurled for display. Some had yellow spots or irritated taste buds, others were blue as spoiled beef. Some performed lewd acrobatics, flicking up and down or curling upward to reveal spikes depending from their undersides like the antennae of deep-sea fish. And then there were 2 or 3 that looked perfect, opalescent as oysters and enticingly plump. These were the tongues of the married men, who'd already donated their semen, in abundance, to the lucky women taxing the sofa cushions across the room. The wives and mothers, who were nursing other complaints by now of insufficient sleep and stalled careers, complaints that to Thomasina were desperate wishes. At this point I should introduce myself. I'm Wally Mars. I'm an old friend of Thomasina's. Actually, I'm an old boyfriend. We went out for 3 months and 7 days in the spring of 1985. At the time, most of Thomasina's friends were surprised that she was dating me. They said what she did when she saw my name on the ingredient list. They said, "Wally Mars?" I was considered too short. I'm only 5'4", and not athletic enough. Thomasina loved me, though. She was crazy about me for a while. Some dark hook in our brains, which no one could see, linked us up. She used to sit across the table, tapping it and saying, "What else?" She liked to hear me talk. She still did. Every few weeks she called to invite me to lunch, and I always went. At the time all this happened, we made a date for a Friday. When I got to the restaurant, Thomasina was already there. I stood behind the hostess station for a moment, looking at her from a distance and getting ready. She was lounging back in her chair, sucking the life out of the first of the 3 cigarettes she allowed herself at lunch. Above her head, on a ledge, an enormous flower arrangement exploded into bloom. Have you noticed? Flowers have gone multicultural too. Not a single rose, tulip, or daffodil lifted its head from the vase. Instead, jungle flora erupted, Amazonian orchids, Sumatran flytraps. The jaws of one flytrap trembled, stimulated by Thomasina's perfume. Her hair was thrown back over her bare shoulders. She wasn't wearing a top. No, she was. It was flesh-colored and skin-tight. Thomasina doesn't exactly dress corporate unless you could call a brothel a kind of corporation. What she has to display was on display. It was on display every morning for Dan Rather, who had a variety of nicknames for Thomasina, all relating to Tabasco sauce. Somehow, though, Thomasina got away with her chorus girl outfits. She toned them down with her maternal attributes, her homemade lasagna, her hugs and kisses, her cold remedies. At the table, I received both a hug and kiss. "Hi, hon," she said, and pressed herself against me. Her face was all lit up. Her left ear, inches from my cheek, was a flaming pink. I could feel its heat. She pulled away and we looked at each other. "So," I said, "big news." "I'm going to do it, Wally. I'm going to have a baby." We sat down. Thomasina took a drag on her cigarette, then funneled her lips to the side, expelling smoke. "I just figured, fuck it," she said. "I'm 40. I'm an adult. I can do this." I wasn't used to her new teeth. Every time she opened her mouth, it was like a flashbulb going off. They looked good, though, her new teeth. I don't care what people think. People either get it or they don't. I'm not going to raise it all by myself. My sister's going to help, and Diane. You can babysit too, Wally, if you want. Me? You can be an uncle. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. "I hear you've got a list of candidates on a recipe," I said. "What? Diane told me she sent you a recipe?" "Oh, that." She inhaled, her cheeks hollowed out. "And I was on it or something?" "Old boyfriends." Thomasina exhaled upward. "All my old boyfriends." Just then the waiter arrived to take our drink order. Thomasina was still gazing up at her spreading smoke. "Martini up, very dry, 2 olives," she said. Then she looked at the waiter. She kept looking. "It's Friday," she explained. She ran her hand through her hair, flipping it back. The waiter smiled. "I'll have a martini too," I said. The waiter turned and looked at me. His eyebrows rose, and then he turned back to Thomasina. He smiled again and went off. As soon as he was gone, Thomasina leaned across the table to whisper in my ear. I leaned too. Our faces touched. And then she said, "What about him?" "Who?" "Him." She indicated with her head. Across the restaurant, the waiter's tensed buns retreated, dipping and weaving. "He's a waiter." "I'm not going to marry him, Wally. I just want his sperm." "Well, maybe he'll bring some out as a side dish." Thomasina sat back, stubbing out her cigarette. She pondered me from a distance, then reached for cigarette number 2. "Are you going to get all hostile again?" "I'm not being hostile. Yes, you are. You were hostile when I told you about this, and you're acting hostile now." "I just don't know why you want to pick the waiter." She shrugged. "He's cute. You can do better." "Where?" "I don't know. A lot of places." I picked up my soup spoon. I saw my face in it, tiny and distorted. "Go to a sperm bank. Get a Nobel Prize winner." "I don't just want smart. Brains aren't everything." Thomasina squinted, sucking in smoke, then looked off dreamily. "I want the whole package." I didn't say anything for a minute. I picked up my menu. I read the words fricassee de l'apéro 9 times. What was bothering me was this, the state of nature. It was becoming clear to me, clearer than ever, what my status was in the state of nature. It was low. It was somewhere around hyena. This wasn't the case as far as I knew back in civilization. I'm a catch, pragmatically speaking. I make a lot of money for one thing. My IRA is pumped up to $254,000. But money doesn't count, apparently, in the selection of semen. The waiter's tight buns counted for more. "You're against the idea, aren't you?" Thomasina said. "I'm not against it. I just think if you're going to have a baby, it's best if you do it with somebody else, who you're in love with." I looked up at her. "And who loves you?" "That'd be great. But it's not happening." "How do you know?" I said. "You might fall in love with somebody tomorrow. You might fall in love with somebody 6 months from now." I looked away, scratching my cheek. "Maybe you've already met the love of your life and you don't even know it." Then I looked back into her eyes. "And then you realize it. And it's too late. There you are, with some stranger's baby." Thomasina was shaking her head. "I'm 40, Wally. I don't have much time." "I'm 42, I said. "What about me?" She looked at me closely, as though detecting something in my tone, then dismissed it with a wave. "You're a man. You've got time." After lunch, I walked the streets. The restaurant's glass door launched me into the gathering Friday evening. It was 4:30 and already getting dark in the caverns of Manhattan. From a striped chimney buried in the asphalt, steam shot up into the air. A few tourists were standing around it, making low Swedish sounds, amazed by our volcanic streets. I stopped to watch the steam, too. I was thinking about exhaust anyway, smoke and exhaust. That school bus of Thomasina's? Looking out one window was my kid's face, our kids. We'd been going out 3 months when Thomasina got pregnant. She went home to New Jersey to discuss it with her parents and returned 3 days later having had an abortion. We broke up right after that. So I sometimes thought of him or her, my only actual, snuffed-out offspring. I thought about him right then. What would the kid have looked like? Like me, with buggy eyes and potato nose, or like Thomasina? Like her, I decided. With any luck, the kid would look like her. For the next few weeks, I didn't hear anything more. I tried to put the whole subject out of my mind, but the city wouldn't let me. Instead, the city began filling with babies. I saw them in elevators and lobbies and out on the sidewalk. I saw them straitjacketed into car seats, drooling and ranting. I saw babies in the park, on leashes. I saw them on the subway, gazing at me with sweet, gummy eyes over the shoulders of Dominican nannies. New York was no place to be having babies. So why was everybody having them? Every fifth person on the street toted a pouch containing a bonneted larva. They looked like they needed to go back inside the womb. Mostly you saw them with their mothers. I always wondered who the fathers were. What did they look like? How big were they? Why did they have a kid and I didn't? One night I saw a whole Mexican family camping out in a subway car. 2 small children tugged at the mother's sweatpants while the most recent arrival, a caterpillar wrapped in a leaf, suckled at the wineskin of her breast. And across from them, holding the bedding and the diaper bag, the progenitor sat with open legs. No more than 30, small, squat, paint-spattered, with the broad, flat face of an Aztec. An ancient face, a face of stone passed down through the centuries into those overalls, this hurtling train, this moment. The invitation came 5 days later. It sat quietly in my mailbox amid bills and catalogs. I noticed Thomasina's return address and ripped the envelope open. On the front of the invitation, a champagne bottle foamed out the words, "I'm getting pregnant." Inside, cheerful green type announced, "On Saturday, April 13th, come celebrate life." The date, I learned afterward, had been figured precisely. Thomasina had used the basal thermometer to determine her times of ovulation. Every morning before getting out of bed, she took her resting temperature and plotted the results on a graph. She also inspected her underpants on a daily basis. A clear, albumin-y discharge meant that her egg had dropped. She had a calendar on the refrigerator studded with red stars. She was leaving nothing to chance. I thought of canceling. I toyed with fictitious business trips and tropical diseases. I didn't want to go. I didn't want there to be parties like this. I asked myself if I was jealous or just conservative and decided both. And then, of course, in the end, I did go. I went to keep from sitting at home thinking about it. Thomasina had lived in the same apartment for 11 years. But when I got there that night, it looked completely different. The familiar speckled pink carpeting, like a runner of olive loaf, led up from the lobby, past the same dying plant on the landing, to the yellow door that used to open to my key. The same mezuzah, forgotten by the previous tenants, was still tacked over the threshold. According to the brass marker, 2A, this was still the same, high-priced, one-bedroom I'd spent 98 consecutive nights in almost 10 years ago. But when I knocked and then pushed open the door, I didn't recognize it. The only light came from candles scattered around the living room. While my eyes adjusted, I groped my way along the wall to the closet. It was right where it used to be, and hung up my coat. There was a candle burning on a nearby chest, and taking a closer look, I began to get some idea of the direction Thomasina and Diane had gone with the party decorations. Though inhumanly large, the candle was nevertheless an exact replica of the male member in proud erection, the detailing almost hyper-realistic, right down to the tributaries of veins and the sandbar of the scrotum. The phallus's fiery tip illuminated two other objects on the table. A clay facsimile of an ancient Canaanite fertility goddess, of the type sold at feminist bookstores and New Age emporiums, her womb domed, her breasts bursting, and a package of love incense bearing the silhouette of an entwined couple. I stood there as my pupils dilated. Slowly the room bodied forth. There were a lot of people, maybe as many as 75. It looked like a Halloween party. Women who all year secretly wanted to dress sexy had dressed sexy. They wore low-cut bunny tops or witchy gowns with slits up the side. Quite a few were stroking the candles provocatively or fooling around with the hot wax, but they weren't young. Nobody was young. The men looked the way men have generally looked for the last 20 years, uncomfortable yet agreeable. They looked like me. Champagne bottles were going off, just like on the invitation. After every pop, a woman would shout, "Oops, I'm pregnant," and everyone would laugh. Then I did recognize something, the music. It was Jackson Browne. One of the things I used to find endearing about Thomasina was her antiquated and sentimental record collection. She still had it. I could remember dancing to this very album with her. Late one night, we just took off our clothes and started dancing all alone. It was one of those spontaneous living room dances you have at the beginning of a relationship. On a hemp rug, we twirled each other around, naked and graceless in secret, and it never happened again. I stood there remembering until someone came up from behind. "Hey, Wally." I squinted. It was Diane. "Just tell me," I said, "that we don't have to watch." "Relax. It's totally PG. Thomasina's going to do it later after everybody's gone." "I can't stay long," I said, looking around the room. "You should see the Baster we got. $4.95 on sale at Macy's basement. I'm meeting someone later for a drink. We got the donor cup there, too. We couldn't find anything with a lid, so we ended up getting this plastic toddler's cup. Roland already filled it up." Something was in my throat. I swallowed. "Roland?" "He came early. We gave him a choice between a hustler and a penthouse." "I'll be careful what I drink from the refrigerator." "It isn't in the refrigerator. It's under the sink in the bathroom. I was worried somebody would drink it. Don't you have to freeze it? We're using it in an hour. It keeps." I nodded, for some reason. I was beginning to be able to see clearly now. I could see all the family photographs on the mantel, Thomasina and her dad, Thomasina and her mom. The whole Genovese clan up in an oak tree. And then I said, "Call me old-fashioned, but..." and trailed off. "Relax, Wally. Have some champagne. It's a party." The bar had a bartender. I waved off the champagne and asked for a glass of scotch, straight. While I waited, I scanned the room for Thomasina. Out loud, though pretty quietly, I said, with bracing sarcasm, "Roland." That was just the kind of name it would have to be. Someone out of a medieval epic. The sperm of Roland. I was getting whatever enjoyment I could out of this when suddenly I heard a deep voice somewhere above me say, "Were you talking to me?" I looked up. Not into the sun exactly, but into its anthropomorphic representation. He was both blond and orange, and large, and the candle behind him on the bookshelf lit up his mane like a halo. "Have we met? I'm Roland de Marchalet." "I'm Wally Mars," I said. "I thought that might be you. Diane pointed you out to me." "Everybody's pointing me out. I feel like some kind of prize hog," he said. "My wife just informed me that we're leaving. I managed to negotiate for one more drink." "You're married?" 7 years. "And she doesn't mind?" "Well, she didn't. Right now I'm not so sure." What can I say about his face? It was open. It was a face used to being looked at, looked into, without flinching. His skin was a healthy apricot color. His eyebrows, also apricot, were shaggy like an old poet's. They saved his face from being too boyish. It was this face Thomasina had looked at. She'd looked at it and said, "You're hired." "My wife and I have 2 kids. We had trouble getting pregnant the first time, though, so we know how it can be, the anxiety and the timing and everything." "Your wife must be a very open-minded woman," I said. Roland narrowed his eyes, making a sincerity check. He wasn't stupid, obviously. Thomasina had probably unearthed his SAT scores. Then he gave me the benefit of the doubt. "She says she's flattered. I know I am. I used to go out with Thomasina." I said. "We used to live together." "Really? We're just friends now. It's good when that happens. She wasn't thinking about babies back when we went out," I said. "That's how it goes. You think you have all the time in the world, then boom, you find you don't. Things might have been different," I said. Roland looked at me again, not sure how to take my comment, and then looked across the room. He smiled at someone and held up his drink. Then he was back to me. That didn't work. My wife wants to go." He set down his glass and turned to leave. "Nice to meet you, Wally. Keep on plugging," I said. But he didn't hear me, or pretended not to. I'd already finished my drink, so I got a refill. Then I went in search of Thomasina. I shouldered my way across the room and squeezed down the hall. I stood up straight, showing off my suit. A few women looked at me, then away. Thomasina's bedroom door was closed, but I still felt entitled to open it. She was standing by the window, smoking and looking out. She didn't hear me come in, and I didn't say anything. I just stood there looking at her. What kind of dress should a girl wear to her insemination party? Answer, the one Thomasina had on. This wasn't skimpy, technically. It began at her neck and ended at her ankles. Between those 2 points, however, an assortment of peepholes had been ingeniously razored into the fabric, revealing a patch of thigh here, a glazed hip bone there, up above the white side swell of a breast. It made you think of secret orifices and dark canals. I counted the shining patches of skin. I had 2 hearts, one up, one down, both pumping. And then I said, "I just saw Secretariat." She swung around. She smiled, though not quite convincingly. "Isn't he gorgeous?" "I still think you should have gone with Isaac Asimov." She came over and we kissed cheeks. I kissed hers anyway. Thomasina kissed mostly air. She kissed my semen aura. "Diane says I should forget the Baster and just sleep with him. He's married. They all are." She paused. "You know what I mean." I made no sign that I did. "What are you doing in here?" I asked. She took 2 rapid-fire puffs on her cigarette, as though to fortify herself. Then she answered, freaking out. "What's the matter?" She covered her face with her hand. "This is depressing, Wally. This isn't how I wanted to have a baby. I thought this party would make it fun, but it's just depressing." She dropped her hand and looked into my eyes. "Do you think I'm crazy? You do, don't you?" Her eyebrows went up, pleading. "Did I tell you about Thomasina's freckle? She has this freckle on her lower lip like a piece of chocolate. Everybody's always trying to wipe it off." "I don't think you're crazy, Tom," I said. "You don't?" "No, because I trust you, Wally. You're mean, so I trust you." "What do you mean I'm mean? Not bad mean, good mean. I'm not crazy? You want to have a baby, it's natural." Suddenly, Thomasina leaned forward and rested her head on my chest. She had to lean down to do it. She closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. I put my hand on her back. My fingers found a peephole, and I stroked her bare skin. In a warm, thoroughly grateful voice, she said, "You get it, Wally. You totally get it." She stood up and smiled. She looked down at her dress, adjusting it so that her navel showed, and then took my arm. "Come on," she said. "Let's go back to the party." I didn't expect what happened next. When we came out, everybody cheered. Thomasina held onto my arm and we started waving to the crowd like a couple of royals. For a minute I forgot about the purpose of the party. I just stood, arm in arm with Thomasina, and accepted the applause. When the cheers died down, I noticed that Jackson Browne was still playing. I leaned over and whispered to Thomasina, "Remember dancing to this song? Did we dance to this? You don't remember? I've had this album forever. I've probably danced to it 1,000 times." She broke off. She let go of my arm. My glass was empty again. "Can I ask you something, Thomasina?" "What?" "Do you ever think about you and me?" "Wally, don't." She turned away and looked at the floor. After a moment, in a reedy, nervous voice, she said, "I was really screwed up back then. I don't think I could have stayed with anybody." I nodded. I swallowed. I told myself not to say the next thing. I looked over at the fireplace, as though it interested me, and then I said it. "Do you ever think about our kid?" The only sign that she'd heard me was a twitch next to her left eye. She took a deep breath, let it out. "That was a long time ago." "I know. It's just that when I see you going to all this trouble, sometimes I think it could be different." "I don't think so, Wally." She picked a piece of lint off the shoulder of my jacket, frowning. Then she tossed it away. God, sometimes I wish I was Benazir Bhutto or somebody. You want to be Prime Minister of Pakistan? I want a nice, simple, arranged marriage. Then after my husband and I sleep together, he can go off and play polo. You'd like that? Of course not. That would be horrible. A tress fell into her eyes and she backhanded it into place. She looked around the room. Then she straightened up and said, I should mingle. I held up my glass. Be fruitful and multiply, I said. And Thomasina squeezed my arm and was gone. I stayed where I was, drinking from my empty glass to have something to do. I looked around the room for any women I hadn't met. There weren't any. Over at the bar, I switched to champagne. I had the bartender fill my glass 3 times. Her name was Julie, and she was majoring in art history at Columbia University. While I was standing there, Diane stepped into the middle of the room and clinked her glass. Other people followed, and the room got quiet. First of all, Diane began, before we kick everyone out of here, I'd like to make a toast to tonight's oh-so-generous donor, Roland. We conducted a nationwide search, and let me tell you, the auditions were grueling. Everybody laughed. Somebody shouted, Roland left. He left? Well, we'll toast his semen. We've still got that. More laughter, a few drunken cheers. Some people, men and women both now, were picking up the candles and waving them around. And finally, Diane went on, finally, I'd like to toast our soon-to-be-expecting, knock on wood, mother. Her courage in seizing the means of production is an inspiration to us all. They were pulling Thomasina out onto the floor now. People were hooting. Thomasina's hair was falling down. She was flushed and smiling. I tapped Julie on the arm, extending my glass. Everyone was looking at Thomasina when I turned and slipped into the bathroom. After shutting the door, I did something I don't usually do. I stood and looked at myself in the mirror. I stopped doing that for any prolonged period at least 20 years ago. Staring into mirrors was best at around 13. But that night, I did it again. In Thomasina's bathroom, where we'd once showered and flossed together, in that cheerful, brightly tiled grotto, I presented myself to myself. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking about nature. I was thinking about hyenas again. The hyena, I remembered, is a fierce predator. Hyenas even attack lions on occasion. They aren't much to look at, hyenas, but they do okay for themselves. And so I lifted my glass. I lifted my glass and toasted myself. Be fruitful and multiply. The cup was right where Diane had said it would be. Roland had placed it with priestly care on top of a bag of cotton balls. The toddler cup sat enthroned on a little cloud. I opened it and inspected his offering. It barely covered the bottom of the cup, a yellowish scum. It looked like rubber cement. It's terrible when you think about it. It's terrible that women need this stuff. It's so paltry. It must make them crazy having everything they need to create life but this one meager leaven. I rinsed Roland's out under the faucet. Then I checked to see that the door was locked. I didn't want anybody to burst in on me. That was 10 months ago. Shortly after, Thomasina got pregnant. She swelled to immense proportions. I was away on business when she gave birth in the care of a midwife at St. Vincent's. But I was back in time to receive the announcement. Thomasina Genovese proudly announces the birth of her son, Joseph Mario Genovese, on January 15th, 1996, 5 pounds, 3 ounces. The small size alone was enough to clinch it. Nevertheless, bringing a Tiffany spoon to the little heir the other day, I settled the question as I looked down into his crib. The potato nose, the buggy eyes. I'd waited 10 years to see that face at the school bus window. Now that I did, I could only wave goodbye.
How to Date a Brown Girl, Black Girl, White Girl, a Halfie by Junot Diaz. Wait for your brother, your sisters, and your mother to leave the apartment. You've already told them that you're feeling too sick to go to Union City to visit that tia who likes to squeeze your nuts. He's gotten big, she'll say. And even though your moms knew you weren't sick, you stuck to your story until finally she said, "Go ahead and stay, malcriado." Clear the government cheese from the refrigerator. If the girl's from the terrace, stack the boxes behind the milk. If she's from the park or Society Hill, hide the cheese in the cabinet above the oven, way up where she'll never see. Leave yourself a reminder to get it out before morning, or your moms will kick your ass. Take down any embarrassing photos of your family in the campo, especially the one with the half-naked kids dragging a goat on a rope leash. The kids are your cousins, and by now they're old enough to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Hide the pictures of yourself with an afro. Make sure the bathroom is presentable. Put the basket with all the crapped-on toilet paper under the sink. Spray the bucket with Lysol, then close the cabinet. Shower, comb, and dress. Sit on the couch and watch TV. If she's an outsider, her father will be bringing her, maybe her mother. Her parents don't want her seeing any boys from the terrace. People get stabbed in the terrace. But she's strong-headed, and this time she will get her way. If she's a white girl, you're sure you'll at least get a hand job. The directions you gave her were in your best handwriting, so her parents won't think you're an idiot. Get up from the couch and check the parking lot. Nothing. If the girl's local, don't sweat it. She'll flow over when she's good and ready. Sometimes she'll run into her friends, and a whole crowd will show up. And even though that means you ain't getting shit, it will be fun anyway, and you'll wish these people would come over more often. Sometimes the girl won't flow over at all, and the next day in school she'll smile and say,
"Sorry."
And you'll believe her and be stupid enough to ask her out again. Wait, and after an hour, go out to your corner. The neighborhood is full of traffic. Give one of your boys a shout, and when he says, "Are you still waiting on that bitch?" say, "Hell yeah." Get back inside. Call her house, and when her father picks up, ask if she's there. He'll ask, "Who is this?" Hang up. He sounds like a principal or a police chief, the sort of dude with a big neck who never has to watch his back. Sit and wait. By the time your stomach's ready to give out on you, a Honda or maybe a Jeep pulls in, and out she comes. "Hey," you'll say.
"Look,
She'll say.
My mom wants to meet you. She's got herself all worried about nothing."
Don't panic. Say, "Hey, no problem." Run a hand through your hair like the white boys do, even though the only thing that runs easily through your hair is Africa. She will look good. The white girls are the ones you want the most, but the out-of-towners are usually black. Black girls who grew up with ballet and Girl Scouts, who have 3 cars in their driveway. If she's a halfie, don't be surprised that her mother is white. Say hi. She'll say,
"Hi."
and you'll see that you don't scare her, not really. She will say that she needs easier directions to get out, and even though she already has the best directions in her lap, give her new ones. Make her happy. You have choices. If the girl's from around the way, take her to El Cibao for dinner. Order everything in your busted-up Spanish. Let her correct you if she's Latina, and amaze her if she's black. If she's not from around the way, Wendy's will do. As you walk to the restaurant, talk about school. A local girl won't need stories about the neighborhood, but the other ones might. Supply the story about the loco who'd been storing canisters of tear gas in his basement for years. How one day the canisters cracked and the whole neighborhood got a dose of the military strength stuff. Don't tell her that your moms knew right away what it was, that she recognized its smell from the year the United States invaded your island. Hope that you don't run into your nemesis, Howie, the Puerto Rican kid with the 2 killer mutts. He walks them all over the neighborhood, and every now and then, the mutts corner themselves a cat and tear it to shreds, Howie laughing as the cat flips up in the air, its neck twisted around like an owl, red meat showing through the soft fur. If his dogs haven't cornered a cat, he will walk behind you and say, "Hey, Junior, is that your new fuck buddy?" Let him talk. Howie weighs about 200 pounds and could eat you if he wanted. At the field, he will turn away. He has new sneakers and doesn't want them muddy. If the girl's an outsider, she'll hiss now.
"What a fucking asshole."
A homegirl would have been yelling back at him the whole time, unless she was shy. Either way, don't feel bad that you didn't do anything. Never lose a fight on a first date where that will be the end of it. Dinner will be tense. You are not good at talking to people you don't know. A halfie will tell you that her parents met in the movement.
Back then,
She'll say,
people thought it was the radical thing to do.
it will sound like something her parents made her memorize. Your brother once heard that one too and said, man, that sounds like a whole lot of Uncle Tom and to me. Don't repeat this. Put down your hamburger and say, it must have been hard. She will appreciate your interest. She will tell you more.
Black people
She will say,
treat me real bad. That's why I don't like them.
you'll wonder how she feels about Dominicans. Don't ask. Let her speak on it, and when you've finished eating, walk back through the neighborhood. The skies will be magnificent. Pollutants have made Jersey sunsets one of the wonders of the world. Point it out. Touch her shoulder and say, that's nice, right? Get serious. Watch TV, but stay alert. Sip some of the rum your father left in the cabinet which nobody touches. She'll drink enough to make her brave. A local girl may have hips and a thick ass, but she won't be quick about letting you touch. She has to live in the same neighborhood as you do. She might just chill with you and then go home. She might kiss you and then go. Or she might, if she's reckless, give it up, but that's rare. Kissing will suffice. A white girl might give it up right then. Don't stop her. She'll take her gum out of her mouth and stick it to the plastic sofa covers, and then move close to you.
You have nice eyes.
She might say. Tell her that you love her hair, her skin, her lips, because in truth you love them more than you love your own. She'll say,
I like Spanish guys.
and even though you never been to Spain, say, I like you. You'll sound smooth. You'll be with her until about 8:30, and then she'll want to wash up. In the bathroom, she will hum a song from the radio, and her waist will keep a beat against the lip of the sink. Imagine her old lady coming to get her, what she would say if she knew her daughter had just lain under you and blown your name, pronounced with her 8th grade Spanish, into your ear. While she's in the bathroom, call one of your boys and say, Lo hice, cabrón, or just sit back on the couch and smile. But usually it won't work this way. Be prepared. She will not want to kiss you.
Just cool it.
She'll say. The halfie might lean back, breaking away from you. She will cross her arms, say,
I hate my tits.
Stroke her hair, but she will pull away.
Oh, I don't like anybody to touch my hair.
She will say. She will act like somebody you don't know. In school, she is known for her attention-grabbing laugh, as high and as far-ranging as a gull, but here she will worry you. You will not know what to say.
You're the only kind of guy who asks me out.
She'll say.
You and the black boys.
Say nothing. Let her button her shirt, let her comb her hair, the sound of it stretching like a sheet of fire between you. When her father pulls in and beeps, let her go without too much of a goodbye. She won't want it. During the next hour, the phone will ring. You will be tempted to pick it up. Don't. Watch the shows you want to watch without a family around to debate you. Don't go downstairs. Don't fall asleep. It won't help. Put the government cheese back in its place before your mother kills you.
I've been in a storm here once before with Tom Sawyer and Joe Harper, Jim. It was a storm like this, too, last summer. We didn't know about this place, so we got soaked. The lightning tore a big tree all to splinters. Why don't lightning cast a shadow, Jim? Well, I reckon it do, but I don't know. Well, it don't. I know. The sun does and the candle does, but the lightning don't. Tom Sawyer says it don't, and it's so. Sure, child, I reckon you're mistaken about that. Give me the gun, I'm going to see. So he stood up the gun in the door and held it. And when it lightened, the gun didn't cast any shadow. Jim says, well, that's mighty curious. That's uncommon curious. Now, they say a ghost doesn't cast no shadow. Why is that, you reckon? Of course, the reason is that ghost is made out of lightning, or else the lightning is made out of ghosts. But I don't know which it is. I wish I knew which it is, Huck. Well, I do too, but I reckon there ain't no way to find out. Did you ever see a ghost, Jim? Have I ever seen a ghost? Well, I reckon I have. Oh, tell me about it, Jim, tell me about it. Well, the storms are ripping and tearing and carrying on so a body can't hardly talk, but I reckon I try. Long time ago, when I was about a 16-year-old, my young Mons Williams, that's dead now, was a student in Doctor College in the village where we lived in. That college was a powerful big brick building, 3 stories high, and stood all by itself in a big open place out to the edge of the village. Well, one night in the middle of winter, young Mons Williams, he told me to go to college and go upstairs to the dissecting room on the 2nd floor and warm up a dead man that was there on the table and get him soft so he can cut him up. What for, Jim? I don't know. See if I could find something in him, maybe. Anyways, that's what he told me, and he told me to wait there till he come. So I takes a lantern and starts out across town. My, but it was a blowing and a sleeting and a cold. There wasn't nobody stirring in the streets, and I could scarcely shove along against the wind. It was almost midnight and dreadful dark. I was mighty glad to get to the place, child. I unlocked the door and went upstairs to the dissecting room. That room was 60 foot long and 25 foot wide, and all along the wall on both sides was the long black gowns a-hanging that the students wear when they's a-chopping up the dead people. Well, I go a-swinging the lantern along, and the shadows in them gowns went to spreading out and drawing along the wall, and it scared me. It looked like they was swinging their hands just to get them warm. Well, I never looked at them no more, but it seemed like they were doing it behind my back just the same. There was a table about 40 foot long down the middle of the room with 4 dead people on it, laying on their backs with their knees up and sheets over them. You could see the shapes under the sheets. Well, Mas Williams, he told me to warm up the big man with the black whiskers. So I uncovered one. He didn't have no whiskers, but he had his eyes open, and I covered them up quick, I bet you. The next one was such a ghastly sight that I almost let the lantern drop. Well, I skipped one carcass and went for the last one. I raised up the sheet, and I said, "All right, boss, you're the chap I'm after." He had the black whiskers and was a rattling big man and looked wicked like a pirate. He was naked. They all were. He was laying around sticks and rollers. I took the sheet off him and rolled him along feet first to the end of the table before the fireplace. His legs was apart and his knees was cocked up some. So when I upended him on the end of the table, he sat up there looking pretty natural, with his feet out and his big toes sticking up like he was warming himself. I propped him up with the rollers, and then I spread the sheet over his back and over his head to help warm him. And then I was trying the corners under his chin, and by jings, he opened up his eyes. I let go and stood off and looked at him, feeling mighty shaky. Well, he didn't look nothing particular. I ain't do nothing, so I know he was good and dead yet. But I couldn't stand them eyes, you know. It made me feel all overish just to look at them. So I pulled the sheet clear down over his face and under his chin and tied it real hard. And there he sat all naked in front with his head like a big snowball and the sheet covering his back and falling down on the table behind. So there he sat with his legs spread out. But blame it, he didn't look no better than he did before. His head was so awful somehow, but them eyes was covered up. So I reckon I let him stand at that and try not to improve him up no more. Well, I stooped down between his legs on the hearthstone and took the candle out the lantern and held it in my hand and so to make some more light. There was some embers in the fireplace, but the wood was all over the other end of the room. Whilst I was a-stooping there getting ready to go after the wood, the candle flickered, and I thought the old man moved his legs. It kind of made me shiver. I put out my hand and felt over his legs that was poked along past my left jaw, and it was cold as ice, so I reckon he didn't move. Then I felt over the leg that was poked past my right jaw, and it was powerful cold too. You see, I was a-stooping down right betwixt them. Well, pretty soon I thought I see his toes move. They was just in front of me on both sides. I tell you, honey, I was getting real uneasy. You see, there was a great old big rambling building and nobody but me in it. And that man over me with the sheet round his head and the wind a-wailing around the place like the spirits was in trouble, and the sheet a-driving against the glass, and the clock struck 12 in the village. And it was so far away and the wind choked up the sound, so it only sounded like a moan, that's all. Well, thinks I wish I was out of this. What is going to become of me? And this fella's a-moving his toes. I know it. I could see him move. and I can just feel them eyes of his and see that old dumpling head done up in the sheet and, well, sir, just at that minute, down he comes. Right astraddle of my neck with his cold legs and kicked the candle out. My, what did you do, Jim? Do? Well, I ain't never done nothing. Only I just got up and healed it in the dark. I wasn't going to wait to find out what he wanted. No, sir, I split downstairs and linked it at home, yelping every jump. What did your Mons Williams say? He said I was a fool. He went there and found a dead man on the floor all comfortable and took and chopped him up. Guy rot him. I wish I had a hack at him. What made him hop onto your neck, Jim? Well, Mons Williams said I didn't prop him good with the rollers. But I don't know. It wasn't no way for a dead man to act, no how. It might scare some people to death. But Jim, he wasn't rightly a ghost. He was only a dead man. Didn't you ever see a real, sure enough ghost? You bet I have. Lots of them. Well, tell me about them, Jim. Tell me about them. All right, I will sometime. But the storms are slacking up. Now we better go ahead and tend to the lines and bait them again.
Jack Kerouac began keeping journals as a 14-year-old boy in 1936 and continued to do so somewhat obsessively until his death at age 47. The following entries span the years from 1948, when the 25-year-old Kerouac had recently returned to New York from a cross-country trip, to 1950, when his first book, The Town and the City, was published. January 1st, 1948, Queens, New York. Today read my novel, The Town and the City, in its entirety. I see that it's almost finished. What is my opinion? It is a sum of myself as far as the written word can go, and my opinion of it is like my opinion of myself, gleeful and affectionate one day, black with disgust the next. Wrote 2,500 words until interrupted by a visit from Allen Ginsberg, who came at 4 o'clock in the morning to tell me that he's going mad. But once and if cured, he will communicate with other human beings as no one ever has, completely, sweetly, naturally. He described his terror and seemed on the verge of throwing a fit in my house. When he calmed down, I read him parts of my novel, and he leeringly announced that it was greater than Melville in a sense, the great American novel. I did not believe a word he said. Someday I'll take off my own mask and tell all about Allen Ginsberg and what he is in the real flesh. It seems to me that he's just like any other human being, and that this drives him to wit's ends. How can I help a man who wants to be a monster one minute and a god the next? June 3rd, 1948. I worked out an intricate mathematical thing which determines how assiduously I'm getting my novel typed and revised day after day. It's too complicated to explain, but suffice it to say that yesterday I was batting .246, and after today's work my batting average rose to .306. Point is, I've got to hit like a champion. I've got to catch up and stay with Ted Williams, currently hitting .392. If I can catch him, June will be the final month of work on Town and the City. August 17th, 1948. Babe Ruth died yesterday. And I asked myself, where is Babe Ruth's father? Who spawned this Bunyan? What man, where, what thoughts did he have? Nobody knows. This is an American mystery. August 23rd, 1948. I have another novel in mind, On the Road, which I keep thinking about. 2 guys hitchhiking to California in search of something they don't really find, and losing themselves on the road, coming all the way back, hopeful of something else. January 3rd, 1949, San Francisco. The Saga of the Mist, New York to New Orleans, New York across the tunnel to New Jersey, the Jersey Night of Allen Ginsberg. We in the car, jubilant, beating on the dashboard of the 1949 Hudson Coupe, headed west, haunted by something I have yet to remember. Neil and I and Luann talking of the value of life as we speed along. Whither goest thou, America, in thy shiny car at night? Seldom had I been so glad. It was sweet to sit near Luann. In the back seat, Al and Rhoda made love, and Neil drove with the bebop music playing in the radio. Huzzah! Neil got lost outside of Baltimore and wound up on a ridiculously narrow little tar road in the woods. He was trying to find a shortcut. "Doesn't look like Route 1, he said, ruefully. Seemed a very funny remark. Near Emporia, Virginia, we picked up a mad hitchhiker who said he was Jewish, Herbert Diamond, and made his living knocking at the doors of Jewish homes all over the country, demanding money. "I am a Jew! Give me money!" "What kicks?" cried Neil. I drove in South Carolina. which was flat and dark in the night, with star-shiny roads and southern dullness somewhere around. Outside Mobile, Alabama, we began to hear rumors of New Orleans and chicken jazz and gumbo bebop shows on the radio, and wild back alley jazz. So we yelled happily in the car. "Smell the people!" said Neil at a filling station in Algiers before going to Bill Burroughs' house. I'll never forget the wild expectancy of the moment. The rickety streets, the palms, great late afternoon clouds over the Mississippi, the girls going by, the children, the soft bandanas of air coming like odor, the smell of people and rivers. God is what I love. February 1st, 1949, California, Richmond to Frisco. Riding to Frisco from Richmond on a rainy night, and Hudson sulking in backseat. Oh, the pangs of travel, the spirituality of hashish. I saw that Neil at the wheel of the car, a wild machinery of kicks and sniffs and maniacal laughter, a kind of human dog, and then I saw Allen Ginsberg, a 17th century poet in dark vestments, standing in the sky of Rembrandt darkness. Then I myself, like Slim Gaillard, stuck my head out the window with Billie Holiday eyes and offered my soul to the whole wide world. Big sad eyes like the whores in the Richmond Mud Shack Saloon. Saw how much genius I had, too. Saw how sullen blank Luann hated me. Saw how unimportant I was to them, and the stupidity of my designs on her, and my betrayal of all male friends. February 6, 1949. Spokane, Portland to Butte. 2 hobo panhandlers in back of bus on way out at midnight said they were bound for the Dales, a small farming and lumber town, to beat $1 or $2. Drunk. God damn it, don't get us thrown off Hood River. Beat the bus driver for a couple. We rolled in the big darkness of the Columbia River Valley in a blizzard. I woke up after a nap and had a chat with a hobo. Said he'd be an old-time outlaw if J. Edgar Hoover had not made it against the law to steal. I lied and said I'd driven a stolen car from New York to Frisco. I woke up at Tonopah Falls, hundreds of feet high. A hooded phantom dropped water from his huge, icy forehead. I was scared because I could not see what was in the darkness up beyond the hood of the ice. What hairy horrors. What night. The bus driver plunged along over mad ridges, and northeast through Connell, Sprague, Cheney, Wheaton cattlelands like East Wyoming, and a gale of blizzards to Spokane. February 7th, 1949, Miles City. Visions of Montana, Coeur d'Alene to Miles City. We came along the waterbed of the Coeur d'Alene River to Cataldo. I saw clusters of houses homesteading in the wild mountain holes. We rose to the heights in the snowy gray. Below in the gulch, one single shack light burned. 2 boys in a car almost went off the ridge, avoiding our bus. In Butte, I stored my bag in a locker. A drunken Indian wanted me to go drinking with him, but I cautiously declined. A short walk around the sloping streets and below zero weather at night showed that everybody in Butte was drunk. This was a Sunday night. I hoped the saloons would stay open until I'd seen my fill. They close at dawn, if at all. I walked into one great old-time saloon and had a giant beer. Another gambling saloon was indescribable. Groups of sullen Indians, Blackfeet, drinking red whiskey in the John. Hundreds of men of all kinds, playing cards, and one old professional house gambler who tore my heart out because he reminded me so much of my father. Big green eye shade, handkerchief protruding from back pocket, great, rugged, pockmarked, angelic face, unlike Pop's, and the asthmatic, laborious sadness of such men. I could not take my eyes off him. My whole concept of on the road changed as I watched. An old man with slitted eyes called John by respectful men coolly played cards till dawn. He's been playing cards in the Montana saloon night of spittoons, smoke, and whiskey since 1880. Days of the winter cattle drive to Texas and a sitting bull. Ah, dear father. February 9th, 1949. North Dakota, from Montana to Minnesota. The mad bus driver almost went off the road on a sudden low snowdrift. It didn't faze him in the least. Till a mile outside of Dickinson, we came upon impassable drifts and a traffic jam in the Black Dakota midnight, blasted by heath winds from the Saskatchewan plain. There were lights, and many sheepskin men toiling with shovels in confusion, and bitter as cold out there, 25 below, I judged conservatively. Another eastbound bus was stuck, and many cars. The cause of the congestion was a small panel truck carrying slot machines to Montana. Eager young men with shovels came from the little town of Dickinson, most of them wearing red baseball caps, led by the sheriff, a strong, joyous boy of 25 or so. Some of the boys were 14, even 12. I thought of their mothers and wives waiting at home with hot coffee, as though the traffic jam in the snow was an emergency touching Dickinson itself. Is this the isolationist Middle West? Where in the effete-thinking East would men work for others for nothing at midnight in howling, freezing gales? We in the bus watched. Once in a while, a boy came in to warm up. Finally, the bus driver, a maniacal and good man, decided to pile on through. He gunned the diesel motor and the big bus went sloughing through drifts. We swerved into the panel truck. I believe we may have hit a jackpot. Then we swerved into a brand new 1949 Ford. Wham! Wham! Finally, after an hour of travails, we were back on dry ground. In Dickinson, the cafe was crowded and full of Friday night excitement about the snow jam. I wish that I had been born and raised in Dickinson, North Dakota. The trip across sunny flat Minnesota was uneventful. How dull it was to be in the East again. No more raw hopes. All was satisfied here. April 23rd, 1949. In the past week, Bill, Alan, Hunky, Vicky, and Little Jack were all arrested and put in jail. Bill for narcotics in New Orleans, the others for robbery and etc. in New York. It's about time for me to start working on the road in earnest. For the first time in ages, I want to start a new life. We, the whole family, are going to move out to Colorado within a year. And within 2 years, I'm going to marry a young lady. My aim is to write, make money, and buy a big wheat farm. This is the turning point, the end of my youth, and the beginning of manhood. How sad. July 4th, 1949, Denver. Today was one of the saddest days I've ever seen. My eyes are pale from it. In the morning, we drove my ma to the depot, bringing my baby nephew in his diapers with us. A hot day, sad, empty holiday streets in downtown Denver, and no fireworks. In the depot, we wheeled the baby around on marble floors. His yells mingled with the roar of time up in the dome. I checked my mother's suitcase in anticipation of a send-off stroll to a bar or something, but we only sat sadly. Poor Paul read a mechanics magazine. Then the train came. As I write this at midnight, she's somewhere near Omaha. In the afternoon, Paul and Nin and the baby and I tried to make a go of it with a picnic at Berkeley Lake, but we only sat sadly under gray skies and ate tasteless sandwiches. At the fireworks at Denver U Stadium, great crowds had been waiting since twilight, sleepy children and all. Yet no sooner did the shots begin in the sky than these unhappy people trailed home before the end of the show, as though they were too unhappy to see what they had waited for. August 1949. I walk in darkness and no one will help me but my own mad self. I want to communicate with Dostoevsky in heaven and ask old Melville if he's still discouraged, and Wolfe why he let himself die at 38. I don't want to give up. I promise I shall never give up, and that I'll die yelling and laughing. The softball game in Denver was better than all this poor philosophizing. In a fever of sad understanding, I saw beyond envies such as these. I'd just seen Bob Giroux off the airplane in New York, and walked and hitched back from the airport in a mammoth plane's dusk, a speck on the surface of the sad red earth. I arrived among lights of 27th and Welton, the Denver Negro town. With Giroux at Central City, I'd seen that my being a published writer was going to be merely a sad affair. Not that he intended to show me that. I saw how sad he was, and therefore how the best and highest that the world has to offer was in fact empty, spiritless. Because after all, he is a great New Yorker, a man of affairs, a success at 35, famous young editor. I told him there were no laurel wreaths, i.e. the poet did not find ecstasies in worldly fame, nor in fortune, nor even in anything like acclaim or regard. He quite sensibly told me that the laurel wreath is worn only in the moment of writing. But that night my dream of glory turned gray because I saw the best the white world has to offer was not enough ecstasy for me, not enough life, joy, kicks, music, not enough night. I stopped at a little shack where a man sold hot red chili in paper containers. I bought some and ate it strolling in the dark, mysterious streets. I wished I was a Negro, a Denver Mexican, or even a Jap, anything but a white man disillusioned by the best in his own white world. And all my life, I had white ambitions. I passed the dark porch steps of Mexican and Negro home. There were soft voices and occasionally the dusky leg of some mysterious, sensual girl. A group of Negro women came by, and one of the younger ones detached herself from mother-like elders to come and say, "Hello, Eddie." But I knew damn well I wasn't so fortunate as to be Eddie, some white kid who dug the colored girls down there. I was merely myself. I was so sad in the violet dark, strolling, wishing I could exchange words with the happy, true-minded, ecstatic Negroes of America. All this reminded me of Neil and Lou Ann, who had been children here and nearby. How I yearned to be transformed into an Eddie and Neil, a jazz musician, a nigger, a construction worker, a softball pitcher, anything in these wild, dark, humming streets of Denver night. Anything but myself. So pale and unhappy, so dim. At 23rd and Welton, the great softball game was going on under floodlights, which practically illuminated the gas tank. What a cruel touch. Now it was the nostalgia of the gas house kids. The great eager crowd roared at every play. The strange young heroes of all kinds, white, colored, Mexican, Indian, were performing with utter seriousness. They were just sandlot kids in uniform, while I, in my college days, with my white ambitions, had to be a professional-type athlete. I hated myself thinking of it. Never in my life had I been innocent enough to play ball this way before all the families and girls in the neighborhood. No, I had to go on and be a college punk, playing before co-eds and stadiums, and join fraternities and wear sport jackets instead of Levi's and sweatshirts. Some people are made to wish they were other than what they are, only so they may wish and wish and wish. This is my star. What had I done with my life, shutting off the doors to real, boyish human joy like this? What had made me strive to be different from all this? Now it was too late. I walked away to the dumb downtown streets of Denver, for the trolley at Colfax and Broadway, where the big Capitol building is, with its lit-up dome and swarded lawns. I walked the pitch-black roads and came to the house I'd spent my $1,000 on for nothing, where my sister and brother-in-law were sitting worrying about money and work and insurance and security and all that, in the white-tile kitchen.
They were raised on small, poor ranches in opposite corners of the state. Jack Twist in Lightning Flat, up on the Montana border, Ennis Delmar from around Sage near the Utah line, both high school dropout country boys with no prospects, brought up to hard work and privation, both rough-mannered, rough-spoken, inured to the stoic life. Ennis, reared by his older brother and sister after their parents drove off the only curve on Dead Horse Road, leaving them $24 in cash and a 2-mortgage ranch, applied at age 14 for a hardship license that let him make the hour-long trip from the ranch to the high school. The pickup was old, no heater, 1 windshield wiper, and bad tires. When the transmission went, there was no money to fix it. He had wanted to be a sophomore, felt the word carried kind of a distinction, but the truck broke down just short of it, pitching him directly into ranch work. In 1963, when he met Jack Twist, Ennis was engaged to Alma Beers. Both Jack and Ennis claimed to be saving money for a small spread. In Ennis's case, that meant a tobacco can with 2 $5 bills inside. That spring, hungry for any job, each had signed up with farm and ranch employment. They came together on paper as herder and camp tender for the same sheep operation north of Signal. The summer range lay above the tree line on Forest Service land on Brokeback Mountain. It would be Jack Twist's second summer on the mountain, Ennis's first. Neither of them was 20. They shook hands in the choky little trailer office in front of a table littered with scribbled papers, a Bakelite ashtray brimming with stubs, Venetian blinds hung askew and admitted a triangle of white light, the shadow of the foreman's hand moving into it. Joe Aguirre, wavy hair the color of cigarette ash and parted down the middle, gave them his point of view. Forest Service got designated campsites on the allotments. Camps can be a couple of miles from where we pasture the sheep. Bad predator loss. Nobody near looking after 'em at night. What I want? Camp tender in the main camp where the Forest Service says. But the herder, pointing at Jack with the chop of his hand, pitch a pup tent on the QT with the sheep, out of sight, and he's gonna sleep there. Eat supper, breakfast in camp, but sleep with the sheep. 100%. No fire, don't leave no sign. Roll up that tent every morning in case Forest Service snoops around. Got the dogs, you're 30-30, sleep there. Last summer had goddamn near 25% loss. I don't want that again. You, he said to Ennis, taking in the ragged hair, the big nicked hands, the jeans torn, button-gaping shirt. Fridays, 12 noon, be down at the bridge with your next week's list and mules. Somebody with supplies will be there in a pickup. He didn't ask if Ennis had a watch, but took a cheap round ticker from a box on a high shelf, wound and set it, tossed it to him as if he weren't worth the reach. Tomorrow morning, we'll truck you up the jump-off. Pair of deuces going nowhere. They found a bar and drank beer through the afternoon. Jack telling Ennis about a lightning storm on the mountain the year before that killed 42 sheep, the peculiar stink of 'em and the way they bloated, the need for plenty of whiskey up there. At first glance, Jack seemed fair enough, with his curly hair and quick laugh, but for a small man he carried some weight in the haunch, and his smile disclosed buck teeth, not pronounced enough to let him eat popcorn out of the neck of a jug, but noticeable. He was infatuated with rodeo life. He fastened his belt with a minor bull riding buckle, but his boots were worn to the quick, holed beyond repair, and he was crazy to be somewhere, anywhere else than Lightning Flat. Ennis, high-arched nose and narrow face, was scruffy and a little cave-chested, balanced a small torso on long caliper legs, and possessed a muscular and supple body made for the horse and for fighting. His reflexes were uncommonly quick, and he was farsighted enough to dislike reading anything except Hamley's saddle catalog. The sheep trucks and horse trailers unloaded at the trailhead, and a bandy-legged Basque showed Ennis how to pack the mules. 2 packs and a riding load on each animal, ring-lashed with double diamonds and secured with half hitches, telling him don't never order soup. Them boxes of soup are real hard to pack. 3 puppies belonging to one of the blue heelers went in a pack basket, the runt inside Jack's coat, for he loved a little dog. Ennis picked out a big chestnut called Cigar Butt to ride, Jack a bay mare that turned out to have a low startle point. The string of spare horses included a mouse-colored Grollo whose looks Ennis liked. Ennis and Jack, the dogs, the horses and mules, the 1,000 ewes and their lambs flowed up the trail like dirty water through the timber and out above the tree line into the great flowery meadows and the coursing endless wind. They got the big tent up on the Forest Service platform, the kitchen and grub boxes secured. Both slept in camp that first night. Jack, already bitching about Joe Aguirre's sleep with the sheep and no fire order, though he saddled the bay mare in the dark morning without saying much. Dawn came, glassy orange, stained from below by a gelatinous band of pale green. The sooty bulk of the mountain paled slowly until it was the same color as the smoke from Ennis's breakfast fire. The cold air sweetened, banded pebbles and crumbs of soil cast sudden pencil-long shadows, and the rearing lodgepole pines below them massed in slabs of somber malachite. During the day, Ennis looked across the great gulf and sometimes saw Jack, a small dot, moving across a high meadow as an insect moves across a tablecloth. Jack, in his dark camp, saw Ennis as night fire, a red spark on the huge black mass of mountain. Jack came lagging in late one afternoon, drank his 2 bottles of beer, cooled in a wet sack on the shady side of the tent, ate 2 bowls of stew, 4 of Ennis's stone biscuits, a can of peaches, rolled a smoke, watched the sun drop. I'm commuting 4 hours a day. Come in for breakfast, go back to the sheep, evening get 'em bedded down, come in for supper, go back to the sheep. Spend half the night jumping up and checking for coyotes. By rights I should be spending the night here. Aguirre got no right to make me do this. You want to switch? Said Ennis. I wouldn't mind herding. I wouldn't mind sleeping out there. That ain't the point. Point is, we both should be in this camp. And that goddamn pup tent smells like cat piss or worse. Wouldn't mind being out there. Tell you what, you gotta get up a dozen times in the night out there over them coyotes. Happy to switch, but give you warning I can't cook worth shit. Pretty good with a can opener. Can't be no worse than me then. Sure, I wouldn't mind to do it. They fended off the night for an hour with the yellow kerosene lamp, and around 10, Ennis rode Cigar Butt, a good night horse, through the glimmering frost back to the sheep, carrying leftover biscuits, a jar of jam, and a jar of coffee with him for the next day, saying he'd save a trip, stay out till supper. Shot a coyote first light, he told Jack the next evening, sloshing his face with hot water, lathering up soap, and hoping his razor had some cut left in it, while Jack peeled potatoes. Big son of a bitch. Balls on him the size of apples. I bet he took a few lambs. Looked like he could eat a camel.
You want some of this hot water? There's plenty.
It's all yours,
Well, I'm gonna wash everything I can reach.
he said, pulling off his boots and jeans. No drawers, no socks, Jack noticed, slapping the green washcloth around until the fire spat. They had a high-time supper by the fire, a can of beans each, fried potatoes, a quart of whiskey on shares, sat with their backs against a log, boot soles and copper jean rivets hot, swapping the bottle while the lavender sky emptied of color and the chill air drained down, drinking, smoking cigarettes, getting up every now and then to piss, firelight throwing a sparkle in the arched stream, tossing sticks on the fire to keep the talk going. Talking horses and rodeo, rough stock events, wrecks and injuries sustained, the submarine Thresher, lost 2 months earlier with all hands, and how it must have been in those last doom minutes. Dogs each had owned and known, the military service, Jack's home ranch, where his father and mother held on, Ennis's family place, folded years ago after his folks died, the older brother in Signal and a married sister in Casper. Jack said his father had been a pretty well-known bull rider years back, but kept his secrets to himself. Never gave Jack a word of advice. Never once came to see Jack ride, though he had put him on the woolies when he was a little kid. Ennis said the kind of riding that interested him lasted longer than 8 seconds and had some point to it. Money's a good point, said Jack, and Ennis had to agree. They were respectful of each other's opinions, each glad to have a companion where none had been expected. Ennis, riding into the wind, back to the sheep in the treacherous drunken light, thought he'd never had such a good time. Felt he could paw the white out of the moon. The summer went on, and they moved the herd to a new pasture, shifted the camp. The distance between the sheep and the new camp was greater, and the night ride longer. Ennis rode easy, sleeping with his eyes open, but the hours he was away from the sheep stretched out and out. Jack pulled a squalling burr out of the harmonica, flattened a little from a fall off the skittish bay mare. And Ennis had a good raspy voice. A few nights, they mangled their way through some songs. Ennis knew the salty words to Strawberry Roan, and Jack tried a Carl Perkins song, bawling, "What I say, yay, yay." But he favored a sad hymn, Water-Walking Jesus, learned from his mother who believed in the Pentecost, and that he sang in endured slowness, setting off distant coyote yips.
Too late to go out to them damn sheep,
said Ennis, dizzy drunk on all fours one cold hour when the moon had notched past 2. The meadow stones glowed white-green, and a flinty wind worked over the meadow, scraped the fire low, then ruffled it into yellow silk sashes.
Got an extra blanket all rolled up out here and grab 40 winks right out at first light.
Freeze your ass off when the fire dies down. Better off sleeping in the tent.
Doubt I'll feel nothing.
But he staggered under canvas, pulled off his boots, snored on the ground cloth for a while, woke Jack with a clacking of his jaw.
Jesus Christ! Quit hammering and get over here. Bedroll's big enough,
said Jack in an irritable, sleep-clogged voice. It was big enough, warm enough, and in a little while they deepened their intimacy considerably. Ennis ran full throttle on all roads, whether fence-mending or money-spending, and he wanted none of it when Jack seized his left hand and brought it to his erect cock. Ennis jerked his hand away as though he'd touched fire, got to his knees, unbuckled his belt, shoved his pants down, hauled Jack onto all fours, and with the help of the clear slick and a little spit, entered him. Nothing he'd done before, but no instruction manual needed. They went at it in silence except for a few sharp intakes of breath, and Jack's choked.
Gun's going off.
Then out, down, and asleep. Ennis woke in red dawn with his pants around his knees, a top-grade headache, and Jack butted up against him. Without saying anything about it, both knew how it would go for the rest of the summer. Sheep be damned. As it did go, they never talked about the sex. Let it happen, at first only in the tent at night, then in full daylight with the hot sun striking down, and at evening in the fire glow, quick, rough, laughing and snorting, no lack of noises, but saying not a goddamn word except once. Ennis said,
"I'm not no queer."
And Jack jumped in,
"Me neither. A one-shot thing. Nobody's business but ours."
There were only the two of them on the mountain, flying in the euphoric, bitter air, looking down on the Hawk's Back and the crawling lights of vehicles on the plain below, suspended above ordinary affairs and distant from tame ranch dogs barking in the dark hours. They believed themselves to be invisible, not knowing Joe Aguirre had watched them through his 10x42 binoculars for 10 minutes one day, waiting until they'd buttoned up their jeans, waiting until Ennis rode back to the sheep before bringing up the message that Jack's people had sent word that his Uncle Harold was in the hospital with pneumonia and expected not to make it, though he did, and Aguirre came up again to say so, fixing Jack with his bold stare, not bothering to dismount. In August, Ennis spent the whole night with Jack in the main camp, and in a blowy hailstorm, the sheep took off west and got among a herd in another allotment. There was a damn miserable time for 5 days. Ennis and a Chilean herder with no English trying to sort 'em out, the task almost impossible, as the paint brands were worn and faint at this late season. Even when the numbers were right, Ennis knew the sheep were mixed. In a disquieting way, everything seemed mixed. The first snow came early, on August 13th, piling up a foot, but was followed by a quick melt. The next week, Joe Aguirre sent word to bring them down. Another, bigger storm was moving in from the Pacific. They packed in the game and moved off the mountain with the sheep, stones rolling at their heels, purple cloud crowding in from the west, and the metal smell of coming snow pressing them on. The mountain boiled with demonic energy, glazed with flickering, broken cloud light. The wind combed the grass and drew from the damaged crummelts and slit rock a bestial drone. As they descended the slope, Ennis felt he was in a slow motion but headlong, irreversible fall. Joe Aguirre paid them, said little. He had looked at the milling sheep with a sour expression and said,
Some of these never went up there with you.
The count was not what he'd hoped for either. Wrench stiffs never did much of a job.
You gonna do this next summer?
Said Jack to Ennis in the street, one leg already up in his green pickup. The wind was gusting hard and cold.
Maybe not.
A dust plume rose and hazed the air with fine grit, and he squinted against it.
Like I said, Al and me's getting married in December. Try to get something on the ranch. You?
He looked away from Jack's jaw, bruised blue from the hard punch Ennis had thrown him on the last day.
If nothing better comes along, thought something about going back up to my daddy's place and give him a hand over the winter. Then maybe head out for Texas in the spring, if the draft don't get me. Well, see you around, I guess.
The wind tumbled an empty feed bag down the street until it fetched up under the truck.
Right,
said Jack, and they shook hands, hit each other on the shoulder. Then there was 40 feet of distance between them, and nothing to do but drive away in opposite directions. Within a mile, Ennis felt like something was pulling his guts out, hand over hand, a yard at a time. He stopped at the side of the road, and in a whirling new snow tried to puke, but nothing came up. He felt about as bad as he ever had, and it took a long time for that feeling to wear off. In December, Ennis married Alma Beers and had her pregnant by mid-January. He picked up a few short-lived ranch jobs, then settled in as a wrangler on the old Elwood High-Top place north of Lost Cabin in Washakie County. He was still working there in September when Alma Jr., as he called his daughter, was born, and their bedroom was full of the smell of old blood and milk and baby shit, and the sounds were of squalling and sucking and Alma's sleepy groans, all reassuring of fecundity of life's continuance to one who worked with livestock. When the High-Top folded, they moved to a small apartment in Riverton, up over a laundry. Ennis got on the highway crew, tolerating it, but working weekends at the Rafter Bee in exchange for keeping his horses out there. A second girl was born, and Alma wanted to stay in town near the clinic because the child had an asthmatic wheeze.
Ennis, please, no more damn lonesome ranches for us,
she said, sitting on his lap, wrapping her thin, freckled arms around him.
Let's get a place here in town.
I guess, said Ennis, slipping his hand up her blouse sleeve and stirring the silky armpit hair, fingers moving down her ribs to the jelly breast, the round belly and knee, and up into the wet gap, all the way to the North Pole, or the equator, depending on which way you thought you were sailing, working at it until she shuddered and bucked against his hand, and he rolled her over, did quickly what she hated. They stayed in the little apartment, which he favored because it could be left at any time. The 4th summer since Brokeback Mountain came on, and in June, Ennis had a general delivery letter from Jack Twist, the first sign of life in all that time.
Friend, this letter is a long time overdue. Hope you get it. Heard you was in Riverton. I'm coming through on the 24th. Thought I'd stop and buy you a beer. Drop me a line if you can. Say if you're there.
The return address was Childress, Texas. Ennis wrote back.
You bet.
Gave the Riverton address. The day was hot and clear in the morning, but by noon the clouds had pushed up out of the west, rolling a little sultry air before them. Ennis, wearing his best shirt, white with wide black stripes, didn't know what time Jack would get there, so had taken the day off, paced back and forth, looking down the street, pale with dust. Alma was saying something about taking his friend to the Knife and Fork for supper instead of cooking. It was so hot if they could get a babysitter. But Ennis said more likely he'd just go out with Jack and get drunk. Jack was not the restaurant type, he said, thinking of the dirty spoons sticking out of the cans of cold beans balanced on the log. Late in the afternoon, thunder growling, the same old green pickup rolled in, and he saw Jack get out of the truck. Beat up resistol tilted back. A hot jolt scalded Ennis, and he was out on the landing, pulling the door closed behind him. Jack took the stairs 2 and 2. They seized each other by the shoulders, hugged mightily, squeezing the breath out of each other, saying, "Son of a bitch, son of a bitch." And then, and as easily as the right key turns the lock tumblers, their mouths came together, and hard. Jack's big teeth bringing blood, his head falling to the floor, stubble rasping, wet saliva welling, and the door opening, and Alma looking out for a few seconds at Ennis's straining shoulders, and shutting the door again. And still they clenched, pressing chest and groin and thigh and leg together, treading on each other's toes until they pulled apart to breathe, and Ennis, not big on endearments, said what he said to his horses and daughters. "Little darling." The door opened again a few inches, and Alma stood in the narrow light. What could he say? "Alma, this is Jack Twist. Jack, my wife Alma." His chest was heaving. He could smell Jack, the intensely familiar odor of his cigarettes, musty sweat, and a faint sweetness like grass, and with it the rushing cold of the mountain. "Alma, Jack and me ain't seen each other in 4 years." As if it were a reason. He was glad the light was dim on the landing, but didn't turn away from her.
Sure enough,
said Alma in a low voice. She had seen what she had seen. Behind her in the room, lightning lit the window like a white sheet waving, and the baby cried.
"You got a kid?"
said Jack. His shaking hand grazed Ennis's hand. Electrical current snapped between them.
2 little girls, Alma Jr. and Francine. Love 'em to pieces."
Alma's mouth twitched.
"I got a boy, 8 months old. Tell you what, I married a cute little old Texas girl down in Childress. Lorraine."
From the vibration on the floorboards on which they both stood, Ennis could feel how hard Jack was shaking.
"Alma, Jack and me's going out to get a drink. Might not get back tonight. We get drinking and talking."
Sure enough, Alma said, taking a $1 bill from her pocket. Ennis guessed she was going to ask him to get her a pack of cigarettes. Bring him back sooner.
"Pleased to meet you,"
said Jack, trembling like a run-out horse.
"Ennis,"
said Alma in her misery voice. But that didn't slow him down on the stairs, and he called back.
"Alma, you want smokes? There's some in the pocket of my blue shirt in the bedroom."
They went off in Jack's truck, bought a bottle of whiskey, and within 20 minutes were in the Motel Siesta jouncing a bed. A few handfuls of hail rattled against the window, followed by rain and a slippery wind banging the unsecured door of the next room then and through the night. The room stank of semen and smoke and sweat and whiskey, of old carpet and sour hay, saddle leather, shit, and cheap soap. Ennis lay spread-eagled, spent and wet, breathing deep, still half tumescent. Jack blew forceful cigarette clouds like whale spouts and said,
"Christ, it gotta be all that time of yours a horseback makes it so goddamn good. We gotta talk about this. Swear to God, I didn't know we was gonna get into this again." Yeah, I did. Why, I'm here. I fucking knew it. Redlined all the way. I couldn't get here fast enough. I didn't know where the hell you was. 4 years, I about give up on you. I figured you was sore about that punch. Friend, I was in Texas rodeoing. How I met Lorraine. Look over on that chair.
On the back of a soiled orange chair, he saw the shine of a buckle.
Bull riding. Yep, I made $3,000 that year. Fucking starved. Had to borrow everything but a toothbrush from the other guys. Drove grooves across Texas half the time under that cunt truck fixing it. Anyway, I never did think about losing. Lorraine, there's some serious money there. Her old man's got it. Got this farm machinery business. Of course, he don't let her have none of the money, and he hates my fucking guts, so it's a hard go now, but one of these days... Well, you're gonna go where you look. Army didn't get you.
The thunder sounded far to the east, moving from him in its red wreaths of light.
They can't get no use out of me. Got some crushed vertebrates and a stress fracture. The arm bone, here. You know how bull riding you're always levering off your thigh? She gives a little every time you do it. Even if you tape it good. You break it a little goddamn bit at a time. Tell you what, hurts like a bitch afterward. Had a busted leg, busted in 3 places. Come off a bull. and it was a big bull with a lot of drop. He got rid of me in about 3 flat, and he come after me, and he was sure faster. Lucky enough, friend of mine got his oil checked with a horn dipstick, and that was all she wrote. Bunch of other things, fucking busted ribs and sprains and pains, torn ligaments. See, it ain't like it was in my daddy's time. It's guys with money go to college, trained athletes. You gotta have some money to rodeo now. Laureen's old man wouldn't give me a dime if I dropped it, except one way. And I know enough about the game now, so I see that I ain't never gonna be on the bubble. Other reasons. I'm getting out while I can still walk.
Ennis pulled Jack's hand to his mouth, took a hit from the cigarette, exhaled.
Sure as hell seem in one piece to me. You know, I was sitting up here all the time trying to figure out if I was... Well, I know I ain't. I mean, here we both got wives and kids, right? I like doing it with women, yeah, but Jesus H ain't nothing like this. I never had no thoughts of doing it with another guy, except I sure rang it out 100 times thinking about you. You do it with other guys, Jack? Shit, no! Said Jack, who had been riding more than bulls, not rolling his own. You know that. Old Brokeback got us good, and it sure ain't over. We gotta work out what the fuck we're gonna do now. That summer, when we split up after we got paid out, I had gut cramps so bad I pulled over and tried to puke. Thought I ate something bad at that place in Dubois. Took me about a year to figure out. It was that I shouldn't have let you out of my sights. Too late then by a long, long while. Fran, we got us a fucking situation here. Gotta figure out what to do. I doubt there's nothing we can do now. What I'm saying, Jack, I built a life up in them years. Love my little girls. Alma, it ain't her fault. You got your baby and wife, that place in Texas. You and me can't hardly be decent together if what happened back there.
He jerked his head in the direction of the apartment.
Grabs on us like that. We do that in the wrong place, we'll be dead. There's no reins on this one that scares the piss out of me. Gotta tell you, friend, maybe somebody seen us that summer. I was back there next June thinking about going back. I didn't. Lit out for Texas instead. And Joe Guire's in the office, and he says to me, you boys found a way to make time pass up there, didn't you? And I gave him a look. But when I went out, I seen he had a big-ass pair of binoculars hanging off his rear view.
He neglected to add that the foreman had leaned back in his squeaky wooden tilt chair and said,
Twist, you guys wasn't getting paid to leave the dogs babysit the sheep while you stemmed the rows.
And declined to rehire him. Jack went on.
Yeah, that little punch of yours surprised me. I never figured you to throw a dirty punch. I come up under my brother, K.E., 3 years older than me, slug me silly every day. Dad got tired of me come bawling in the house, and when I was about 6, he set me down and he says, Ennis, you got a problem. And you gotta fix it or it's gonna be with you until you're 90 and K.E.'s 93. Well, I says, he's bigger than me. Dad says, you gotta take him unawares. Don't say nothing to him. Make him feel some pain and get out fast. And keep doing it till he takes the message. Nothing like hurting somebody to make him hear good. So I did. I got him in the outhouse, jumped him on the stairs, come over to his pillow in the night while he was sleeping, and pasted him damn good. Took about 2 days. Never had trouble with K.E. since. The lesson was, don't say nothing and get it over quick.
A telephone rang in the next room, rang on and on, stopped abruptly in mid-peal.
Well, you won't catch me again. Listen, I'm thinking. Tell you what, if you and me had a little ranch together, little cow and calf operation, your horses, it'd be some sweet life. Like I said, I'm getting out of rodeo. I ain't no broke dick rider, and I don't got the bucks to ride out this slump I'm in, and I don't got the bones to keep getting wrecked. I got it figured. Got this plan, Ennis, how we can do it, you and me. Laureen's old man, you bet he'd give me a bunch if I'd get lost. Already more or less said it. Whoa. It ain't gonna be that way. We can't. I'm stuck with what I got, caught in my own loop. Can't get out of it. Jack, I don't want to be like them guys you see around sometimes, and I don't want to be dead. There was these 2 old guys, ranched together down home, Earl and Rich. Dad would pass a remark when he seen 'em. they was a joke, even though they was pretty tough old birds. And I was, 9 years old? And they found Earl dead in an irrigation ditch. They took a tire iron to him, spurred him up, drug him around by his dick until it pulled off just bloody pulp. What the tire iron done looked like pieces of burned tomatoes all over him. Nose tore down from skidding on gravel. You seen that? Dad made sure I seen it. Took me to see it. Me and K.E. Dad laughed about it. Hell, for all I know, he done the job. If he was alive and was to put his head in that door right now, you'd bet he'd go and get his tire iron. 2 guys living together. No. All I can see is we get together once in a while. Way the hell out in the back of nowhere. How much is once in a while? Once in a while every 4 fucking years?
No, said Ennis, forbearing to ask whose fault that was.
I goddamn hate that you're gonna drive away in the morning and I'm going back to work. But if you can't fix it, you gotta stand it. Shit. I've been looking at people on the street. This happen to other people? What the hell do they do? It don't happen in Wyoming, and if it does, I don't know what they do. Maybe they go to Denver, said Jack, sitting up, turning away from him. I don't give a flying fuck. Son of a bitch, Ennis, take a couple days off right now. Get us out of here. Throw your stuff in the back of my truck and let's get up in the mountains a couple of days. Call Alma up and tell her you're going. Come on, Ennis, you just shot my airplane out of the sky. Give me something to go on. This ain't no little things happening here.
The hollow ringing began again in the next room, and as if he were answering it, Ennis picked up the phone on the bedside table and dialed his own number. A slow corrosion worked between Ennis and Alma. No real trouble, just widening water. She was working at a grocery store clerk job, saw she'd always have to work to keep ahead of the bills on what Ennis made. Alma asked Ennis to use rubbers because she dreaded another pregnancy. He said no to that, said he'd be happy to leave her alone if she didn't want any more of his kids. Under her breath, she said,
I'd have 'em if you'd support 'em.
And under that thought,
Anyway, what you like to do, don't make too many babies.
her resentment opened out a little every year. The embrace she had glimpsed, Ennis's fishing trips once or twice a year with Jack Twist, and never a vacation with her and the girls, his disinclination to step out and have any fun, his yearning for low-paid, long-houred ranch work, his propensity to roll to the wall and sleep as soon as he hit the bed, his failure to look at a decent permanent job with the county or the power company put her in a long, slow dive. And when Alma Jr. was 9 and Francine 7, she said, what am I doing hanging around with him? Divorced Ennis and married the Riverton grocer. Ennis went back to ranch work, hired on here and there, not getting much ahead, but glad enough to be around stock again, free to drop things and quit if he had to and go into the mountains at short notice. He had no serious hard feelings, just a vague sense of getting short-changed, and showed it was all right by taking Thanksgiving dinner with Alma and her grocer and the kids, sitting between the girls and talking horses to him, telling jokes, trying not to be the sad daddy. After the pie, Alma got him off into the kitchen, scraped the plates, and said she worried about him, and he ought to get married again. He saw she was pregnant. About 4 or 5 months, he guessed.
Once burned,
He said, leaning against the counter, feeling too big for the room.
You still go fishing with that Jack Twist?
Some. He thought she'd take the pattern off the plate with the scraping.
You know,
She said, and from her tone, he knew something was coming.
I used to wonder how come you never brought any trouts home. Always said you caught plenty. So one time, I got your creel case open the night before you went on one of your little trips. Price tag's still on it after 5 years. And I tied a note on the end of the line. It said, hello, Ennis. Bring some fish home, love, Alma. And then you come back and said you'd caught a bunch of browns and ate 'em up, remember? I looked in the case when I got a chance, and there was my note. Still tied there, and that line hadn't touched water in its life.
As though the word water had called out its domestic cousin, she twisted the faucet, sluiced the plates.
That don't mean nothing. Don't lie. Don't try to fool me, Ennis. I know what it means, Jack Twist. Jack Nasty. You and him.
She'd overstepped his line. He seized her wrist and twisted. Tears sprang and rolled, a dish clattered.
Shut up! Mind your own business. You don't know nothing about it. I'm gonna yell for Bill. You fucking go right ahead. Go on and fucking yell. I'll make him eat the fucking floor and you too.
He gave another wrench that left her with a burning bracelet, shoved his hat on backwards, and slammed out. He went to the Black and Blue Eagle bar that night, got drunk, and had a short, dirty fight and left. He didn't try to see his girls for a long time, figuring they would look him up when they got the sense and the years to move out from Alma. They were no longer young men with all of it before them. Jack had filled out through the shoulders and hams. Ennis stayed as lean as a clothes pole, stepped around in worn boots, jeans, and shirts summer and winter, added a canvas coat in cold weather. A benign growth appeared on his eyelid and gave it a drooping appearance. A broken nose healed crooked. Years on years they worked their way through the high meadows and mountain drainages, horses packing into the bighorns, the medicine bows, the south end of the Galatans, the Absarokas, the Granites, the Owl Creeks, the Bridger Teton Range, the Freeze-Outs and the Shirleys, the Ferrises and the Rattlesnakes, the Salt River Range, into the Wind Rivers over and again, the Sierra Madres, the Gros Ventres, the Washakis, the Laramies, but never returning to Brokeback. Down in Texas, Jack's father-in-law died, and Lorene, who inherited the farm equipment business, showed a skill for management and hard deals. Jack found himself with a vague managerial title, traveling to stock and agricultural machinery shows. He had some money now and found ways to spend it on his buying trips. A little Texas accent flavored his sentences. Cow twisted into cow, and wife coming out as wife. He'd had his front teeth filed down, set with steel plugs and capped, said he'd felt no pain, wore Texas suits and a tall white hat. In May of 1983, they spent a few cold days at a series of little ice-bound no-name high lakes, then worked across into the hail-strewed river drainage. Going up, the day was fine, but the trail, deep-drifted and slopping wet at the margins. They left it to wind through the slashy cut, leading the horses through the brittle branchwood. Jack, lifting his head in the heated noon to take the air, scented with resinous lodgepole, dry needle duff, and hot rock, bitter juniper crushed beneath the horses' hooves. Ennis, weather-eyed, looked west for the heated cumulus that might come up on such a day, but the boneless blue was so deep, said Jack, that he might drown looking up. Around 3, they swung through a narrow pass to a southeast slope where the strong spring sun had had a chance to work, dropped down to the trail again, which lay snowless below them. They could hear the river muttering and making a distant train sound a long way off. 20 minutes on, they surprised a black bear on the bank above them, rolling a log over for grubs, and Jack's horse shied and reared, Jack saying, "Whoa, whoa!" and Ennis's bay dancing and snorting, but holding. Jack reached for the .30-06, but there was no need. The startled bear galloped into the trees with a lumpish gait that made it seem it was falling apart. The tea-colored river ran fast with snowmelt, a scarf of bubbles at every high rock, pools and setbacks streaming. The ochre-branched willows swayed stiffly, pollened catkins like yellow thumbprints. The horses drank, and Jack dismounted, scooped icy water up in his hand, crystalline drops falling from his fingers, his mouth and chin glistening with wet.
Get beaver fever doing that,
said Ennis. Then,
good enough place.
Looking at the level bench above the river, 2 or 3 fire rings from old hunting camps. A sloping meadow rose behind the bench, protected by a stand of lodgepole. There was plenty of dry wood. They set up camp without saying much, picketed the horses in the meadow. Jack broke the seal on a bottle of whiskey, took a long, hot swallow, exhaled forcefully, and said,
"That's one of the 2 things I need right now,"
capped it, and tossed it to Ennis. On the 3rd morning, there were the clouds Ennis had expected. A gray racer out of the west, a bar of darkness, driving wind before it in small flakes. It faded after an hour into tender spring snow that heaped wet and heavy. By nightfall, it had turned colder. Jack and Ennis passed a joint back and forth, the fire burning late. Jack restless and bitching about the cold, poking the flames with a stick, twisting the dial on the transistor radio until the batteries died. Ennis said he'd been putting the blocks to a woman who worked part-time at Wolfier's Bar and Signal, where he was working now for Carscrope's cow and calf outfit, but it wasn't going anywhere, and she had some problems he didn't want. Jack said he'd had a thing going with the wife of a rancher down the road in Childress, and for the last few months he'd slank around expecting to get shot by Lorene, or the husband won. Ennis laughed a little and said he probably deserved it. Jack said he was doing all right, but he missed Ennis bad enough sometimes to make him whip babies. Horses nickered in the darkness beyond the fire's circle of light. Ennis put his arm around Jack, pulled him close, said he saw his girls about once a month. Alma Jr., a shy 17-year-old with his beanpole length, Francine, a little live wire. Jack slid his cold hand between Ennis's legs, said he worried about his boy, who was, no doubt about it, dyslexic or something. Couldn't get anything right, 15 years old and couldn't hardly read. He could see it, though goddamn Laureen wouldn't admit to it, and pretended the kid was okay, refused to get any bitchin' kind of help about it. He didn't know what the fuck the answer was. Laureen had the money and called the shots.
I used to want a boy for a kid,
said Ennis, undoing his buttons.
but just got little girls. I didn't want none of either kind, but fuck all has worked the way I wanted. Nothing never come to my hand the right way.
Without getting up, he threw deadwood on the fire, the sparks flying up with their truths and lies, a few hot points of fire landing on their hands and faces, not for the first time, and they rolled down into the dirt. One thing never changed. The brilliant charge of their infrequent couplings was darkened by the sense of time flying. Never enough time, never enough. A day or two later, in the trailhead parking lot, horses loaded into the trailer. Ennis was ready to head back to Signal, Jack up to Lightning Flat to see the old man. Ennis leaned into Jack's window, said what he'd been putting off the whole week, that likely he couldn't get away again until November, after they'd shipped stock and before winter feeding started.
November? What in the hell happened to August? Tell you what, we said August 9-10 days. Christ, Ennis! Why didn't you tell me about this before? You had a fucking week to say some little word about it, and why is it we're always in friggin' cold weather? We ought to do something. We ought to go south. We ought to go to Mexico one day. Mexico? Jack, you know me. All the traveling I ever done is going around the coffee pot looking for the handle. And I'll be running the baler all August. That's what's the matter with August. Lighten up, Jack. We can hunt in November, kill an ice elk. Try if I can get Don Rose cabin again. We had a good time that year. You know, friend, this is a goddamn bitch of an unsatisfactory situation. You used to come away easy. It's like seeing the Pope now. Jack, I got work. Them early days I used to quit the jobs. You got a wife with money. A good job. You forget how it is being broke all the time. You ever hear of child support? I've been paying out for years and got more to go. Let me tell you. I can't quit this one, and I can't get time off. It was tough enough getting this time. Some of them late heifers is still calving. You don't leave then. You don't. Scrope is a hellraiser, and he's raised hell about me taking the week. I don't blame him. He probably ain't got a night's sleep since I left. The trade-off was August. You got a better idea? I did once.
The tone was bitter and accusatory. Ennis said nothing, straightened up slowly, rubbed his forehead. A horse stamped inside the trailer. He walked to his truck, put his hand on the trailer, said something that only the horses could hear, turned and walked back at a deliberate pace.
You been to Mexico, Jack?
Mexico was the place he'd heard. He was cutting fence now, trespassing the shooting zone.
Hell yes, I been. Where's the fucking problem?
Braced for all these years, and here it came, late and unexpected.
I gotta say this to you one time, Jack, and I ain't fooling. What I don't know, all them things I don't know could get you killed if I should come to know 'em. Try this one, and I'll say it just one time. Tell you what, we could have had a good life together, a fucking real good life. You wouldn't do it, Ennis. So what we got now is Brokeback Mountain. Everything built on that. It's all we got, boy. Fucking all. So I hope you know that, if you don't never know the rest. Count the damn few times we've been together in 20 years. Measure the fucking short leash you keep me on, and then ask me about Mexico, and then tell me you'll kill me for needing it and not hardly never getting it. You got no fucking idea how bad it gets. I'm not you, and I can't make it on a couple of high-altitude fucks once or twice a year. You're too much for me, Ennis, you son of a whoreson bitch. I wish I knew how to quit you.
Like vast clouds of steam from the thermal springs in winter, the years of things unsaid and now unsayable, admissions, declarations, shames, guilts, fears rose around him. Ennis stood as if heart-shot, face gray and deep-lined, grimacing, eyes screwed shut, fists clenched, legs caving, hit the ground on his knees.
Jesus! Ennis?
But before he was out of the truck trying to guess if it was a heart attack or the overflow of incendiary rage, Ennis was back on his feet, and somehow, as a coat hanger is straightened to open a locked car and then bent again to its original shape, they torqued things almost to where they'd been. For what they said was no news. Nothing ended, nothing begun, nothing resolved. What Jack remembered and craved in a way he could neither help nor understand was the time that distant summer on Brokeback, when Ennis had come up behind him and pulled him close. The silent embrace satisfying some shared and sexless hunger. They had stood that way for a long time in front of the fire, its burning, tossing, ruddy chunks of light, the shadow of their bodies a single column against the rock. The minutes ticked from the round watch in Ennis's pocket, from the sticks in the fire settling into coals. Stars bit through the wavy heat layers above the fire. Ennis's breath came slow and quiet. He hummed, rocked a little in the sparklight, and Jack leaned against the steady heartbeat, the vibrations of the humming, like faint electricity, and standing, he fell into sleep that was not sleep, but something else, drowsy and tranced, until Ennis, dredging up a rusty but still usable phrase from the childhood time before his mother died, said,
"Time to hit the hay, cowboy. I gotta go. Come on, you're sleeping on your feet like a horse,"
and gave Jack a shake, a push, and went off into the darkness. Jack heard his spurs tremble as he mounted. The words,
"See you tomorrow,"
and the horse's shuddering snort, grind of hoof on stone. Later, that dozy embrace solidified in his memory as the single moment of artless, charmed happiness in their separate and difficult lives. Nothing marred it, even the knowledge that Ennis would not then embrace him face to face because he didn't want to see or feel that it was Jack he held. And maybe, he thought, they'd never got much further than that. Let be, let be. Ennis didn't know about the accident for months until the postcard to Jack saying that November still looked like the first chance came back stamped, deceased. He called Jack's number in Childress, something he had done only once before, when Alma divorced him, and Jack had misunderstood the reason for the call, had driven 1,200 miles north for nothing. This would be all right. Jack would answer, had to answer. But he didn't. It was Lorene, and she said, "Who? Who is this?" And when he told her again, she said in a level voice, "Yes." Jack was pumping up a flat on the truck out on a back road when the tire blew up. The bead was damaged somehow, and the force of the explosion slammed the rim into his face, broke his nose and jaw, and knocked him unconscious on his back. By the time someone came along, he drowned in his own blood. No, he thought. They got him with the tire iron. "Jack used to mention you. You're the fishing buddy. Or the hunting buddy. I know that. Would have let you know, but I wasn't sure about your name and address." Jack kept most of his friends' addresses in his head. It was a terrible thing. He was only 39 years old. The huge sadness of the northern plains rolled down on him. He didn't know which way it was, the tire iron or a real accident. Blood choking down Jack's throat and nobody to turn him over. Under the wind drone, he heard steel slamming of bone, the hollow chatter of a settling tire rim.
"He buried down there?"
He wanted to curse her for letting Jack die on the dirt road. The little Texas voice came sliding down the wire. "We put a stone up. He used to say he wanted to be cremated. Ashes scattered on Brokeback Mountain. I didn't know where that was. So he was cremated like he wanted, and like I say, half his ashes was interred here, and the rest I sent up to his folks. I thought Brokeback Mountain was around where he grew up, but knowing Jack, it might be some pretend place where the bluebirds sang and there's a whiskey spring."
"We herded sheep on Brokeback one summer,"
said Ennis. He could hardly speak.
"Well, he said it was his place. I thought he meant to get drunk. Drink whiskey up there? He drank a lot."
"His folks still up in Lightning Flat?"
"Oh, yeah. They'll be there till they die. I never met 'em. They didn't come down for the funeral. You get in touch with 'em, I suppose they'd appreciate it if his wishes was carried out."
No doubt about it. She was polite, but the little voice was as cold as snow. The road to Lightning Flat went through desolate country, past a dozen abandoned ranches distributed over the plain at 8 and 10 mile intervals. Houses sitting, blank-eyed in the weeds, corral fences down. The mailbox read, "John C. Twist." The ranch was a meager little place, leafy spurge taking over. The stock was too far distant for him to see their condition, only that they were black baldies. A porch stretched across the front of the tiny brown stucco house, 4 rooms, 2 down, 2 up. Anna sat at the kitchen table with Jack's father. Jack's mother, stout and careful in her movements as though recovering from an operation, said,
"Want some coffee, don't you? Piece of cherry cake?"
"Thank you, ma'am.
"I'll take a cup of coffee, but I can't eat no cake just now."
The old man sat silent, his hands folded on the plastic tablecloth, staring at Ennis with an angry, knowing expression. Ennis recognized in him a not uncommon type with the hard need to be the stud duck in the pond. He couldn't see much of Jack in either one of them. Took a breath.
"I feel awful bad about Jack. Can't begin to say how bad I feel. I knew him a long time. I come by to tell you that if you want me to take his ashes up there on Brokeback like his wife says he wanted, I'd be proud to."
There was a silence. Ennis cleared his throat but said nothing more. The old man said,
"Tell you what, I know where Brokeback Mountain is. He thought he was too goddamn special to be buried in the family plot."
Jack's mother ignored this, said,
"He used to come home every year, even after he was married and down in Texas, and help his daddy on the ranch for a week, fix the gates and mow and all. I kept his room like it was when he was a boy. I think he appreciated that. You're welcome to go up in his room if you want."
The old man spoke angrily.
"I can't get no help around here. Jack used to say, 'Ennis Del Mar,' he used to say, 'I'm gonna bring him up here one of these days and we'll lick this damn ranch into shape.' Had some half-baked idea you 2 of yous was gonna move up here and build a log cabin and help me run this ranch, bring it up. Then this spring, he's got another one's gonna come up here with him and build a place and help run the ranch, some ranch neighbor of his from down in Texas. He's gonna split up with his wife and come back here, so he says. But like most of Jack's ideas, it never come to pass."
So now he knew it had been the tire iron. He stood up, said you bet he'd like to see Jack's room, recalled one of Jack's stories about this old man. Jack was dick-clipped and the old man wasn't. It bothered the son, who had discovered the anatomical disconformity during a hard scene. He had been about 3 or 4, he said, always getting late to the toilet, struggling with buttons, the seat, the height of the thing, and often as not left the surroundings sprinkled down. The old man blew up about it, and this one time worked into a crazy rage.
"Christ, he licked the stuffing out of me. Knocked me down on the bathroom floor, whipped me with his belt. I thought he was killing me. Then he says, 'You want to know what it's like with piss all over the place? I'll learn you.' And he pulls it out and he lets it go all over me, soaked me. Then he throws a towel at me, makes me mop up the floor, take my clothes off and wash them in the bathtub, wash out the towel, and I'm bawling and blubbering. But while he was hosing me down, I seen he had some extra material that I was missing. I seen they'd cut me different, like you crop a ear or scorch a brand. No way to get it right with him after that."
The bedroom, at the top of a steep stair that had its own climbing rhythm, was tiny and hot. Afternoon sun pounding through the west window, hitting the narrow boy's bed against the wall, an ink-stained desk and a wooden chair, a BB gun in a hand-whittled rack over the bed. The window looked down on the gravel road stretching south, and it occurred to him that for Jack's growing-up years, that was the only road he knew. An ancient magazine photograph of some dark-haired movie star was taped to the wall beside the bed, the skin tone gone magenta. He could hear Jack's mother downstairs running water, filling the kettle and setting it back on the stove, asking the old man a muffled question. The closet was a shallow cavity with a wooden rod braced across, a faded cretonne curtain on a string closing it off from the rest of the room. In the closet hung 2 pairs of jeans, crease-ironed and folded neatly over wire hangers. On the floor, a pair of worn packer boots he thought he remembered. At the north end of the closet, a tiny jog in the wall made a slight hiding place, and here, stiff with long suspension from a nail, hung a shirt. He lifted it off the nail, Jack's old shirt from Brokeback days. The dried blood on the sleeve was his own blood, a gushing nosebleed on the last afternoon on the mountain when Jack, in their contortionist grappling and wrestling, had slammed Ennis's nose hard with his knee. He had staunched the blood, which was everywhere, all over both of them, with his shirt sleeve, but the staunching hadn't held because Ennis had suddenly swung from the deck and laid the ministering angel out in the wild columbine, wings folded. The shirt seemed heavy until he saw there was another shirt inside it, the sleeves carefully worked down inside Jack's sleeves. It was his own plaid shirt, lost, he thought, long ago in some damn laundry. His dirty shirt, the pocket ripped, buttons missing, stolen by Jack and hidden here inside Jack's own shirt, the pair like two skins, one inside the other, two in one. He pressed his face into the fabric and breathed in slowly through his mouth and nose, hoping for the faintest smoke and mountain sage and salty sweet stink of Jack. But there was no real scent, only the memory of it, the imagined power of Brokeback Mountain, of which nothing was left but what he held in his hands. In the end, the stud duck refused to let Jack's ashes go.
Tell you what, we got a family plot and he's going in it.
Jack's mother stood at the table, coring apples with a sharp serrated instrument.
You come again,
she said. Bumping down the washboard road, Ennis passed the country cemetery fenced with sagging sheep wire, a tiny fenced square on the welling prairie, a few graves bright with plastic flowers, and didn't want to know that Jack was going to be in there, to be buried on the grieving plain. A few weeks later, on the Saturday, he threw all the coffee pot's dirty horse blankets into the back of his pickup and took 'em down to the quick-stop car wash to turn the high-pressure spray on 'em. When the wet, clean blankets were stowed in the truck bed, he stepped into Higgins' gift shop and busied himself with the postcard rack.
Ennis, what are you looking for rooting through them postcards?
Said Linda Higgins, throwing a sopping brown coffee filter into the garbage can.
Seen a Brokeback Mountain? Over in Fremont County? No, north of here. I didn't order none of them. Let me get the order list. They got it. I can get you 100. I gotta order some more cards anyway. One's enough.
When it came, 30 cents, he pinned it up in his trailer, brass-headed tack in each corner. Below it, he drove a nail, and on the nail he hung a wire hanger with the 2 old shirts suspended from it. He stepped back, looked at the ensemble through a few stinging tears.
Jack, I swear,
he said, though Jack had never asked him to swear anything, and was himself not the swearing kind. Around that time, Jack began to appear in his dreams. Jack as he had first seen him, curly-headed and smiling and buck-toothed, talking about getting up off his pockets and into the control zone. But the can of beans with the spoon handle jutting out and balanced on the log was there as well, in a cartoon shape and lurid colors that gave the dreams a flavor of comic obscenity. The spoon handle was the kind that could be used as a tire iron, and he would wake sometimes in grief, sometimes with the old sense of joy and release, the pillow sometimes wet, sometimes the sheets. There was some open space between what he knew and what he tried to believe, but nothing could be done about it, and if you can't fix it, you've got to stand it.